Hello. Thank you for joining us for tonight's board meeting. Just a few housekeeping items before we get started. When you joined, you'd heard as an audience member that you're in listen-only mode. If you'd like to speak during public comment, please use the raise your hand function to indicate to me that you would like to speak, and I'll unmute you to do so. The raise your hand function is shown by a little hand icon on your screen. Please know your webcam will remain off, so your comment will be audio only. And now I will turn things over to President Grau to begin the meeting. Thank you.
Thanks, Margaret. I call to order the regular board meeting at the Park Ridge Park District Board of Commissioners. Tonight is Thursday, December 2nd, and it's 7 p.m. Please call the roll.
Commissioner Bendy?
Here.
Commissioner Bowe?
Here.
Commissioner Coyne?
Here.
Commissioner Hulting?
Here.
Commissioner LaDuke?
Here.
Commissioner Tunnell?
Here.
Commissioner Grau?
Here.
Thank you.
Does anyone have anything to amend, add, or delete to the current agenda? Okay, seeing none, we will move on to public comment on non-agenda items. If there's anyone in the audience that would like to comment on something that is not on the agenda tonight, please raise your hand.
Do you have a few people in the audience, but I think they might all be here for an agenda item. So nobody's
Okay.
raising their hand.
All right. And then we move on to the executive director's report. I'll take it over to you, Gail.
Thank you. I actually do not have any general updates to share with the board this evening other than our lengthy items on the agenda that we will get to under those items. So I will be happy to answer any questions from the board on anything that is not on the agenda. Okay, let's move along. Our next item on the agenda is the Oakland Park and Facility Public Engagement. Just a few words before I introduce our guests for items A and B. We had a great meeting on Tuesday of the task force, and we'll be hearing those results of the public opinion from Jim tonight for public opinion and strategies. I know that several of the board meetings did hear this presentation, but it will also be for the recording and for the public, and then for those that were not in attendance, and also for maybe some of the information set in for discussion. We'll have the task force recommendation. I did want to mention that we are not looking for any decisions by the board tonight. It's more of a information gathering. And on the 16th, we had planned to have Jim and also Paul Hanley back to answer any further questions. We can talk about if the board feels that's needed at this time after we have some discussion tonight. So without further ado, unless anybody has any comments before we start the presentation. Okay, Jim. It's all yours. Jim Hobart from Public Opinion Strategies. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Let's see. I've got to get my screen ready to share here. And, well. Okay. Can everybody, well, I don't want to see this part. Sorry. Okay. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Perfect. Well, as Gail mentioned, my name is Jim Hobart. I am with Public Opinion Strategies. We are a research and polling firm based in Alexandria, Virginia. And for the past decade or so, I've been working with Paul Hanley with Beyond Your Base on municipal projects all over the state of Illinois. We've worked for school districts, park districts, library districts, and what I do is I handle the quantitative polling. It's typically done via phone and email. So we did a few weeks back a phone survey of N equals 300 likely voters in Park Ridge Park District. What Paul does is he also does a mail survey, and I'm going to walk through both of them. I want to talk a little bit about the difference of the two. The way I like to think about a mail survey is Margaret, for example, and the Park Ridge Park District team have held a whole assortment of community meetings over the last 6 months or so. And what a mail survey is if you could do a community meeting, and in this case, we got 2,000, just over 2,000 replies to the mail survey. It's like doing a community meeting with 2,000 people where all 2,000 get to talk and tell you as much as they want to about a potential referendum. So from that, it is an incredibly powerful exercise. That said, it is much more of what I like to term an informative survey than a predictive survey. And the difference is an informative survey just gives you a whole host of information, of data, of feedback from people in the district, but it is not, almost never, and in this case as well, it is not a look at what a likely electorate in either June 2022 or November 2022 would be. The reason for that is we're totally at the mercy of who returns the mail survey, who gets it in the mail, fills it out, puts it back in an envelope, and sends it back in. And so because of that, it's impossible to maintain quotas, whether it be what the age of a likely electorate looks like, what precincts people are likely to come from. So it's an incredibly powerful tool, but it is not what we would call a predictive survey. The phone survey that I handle is a predictive survey. We make every effort to model what a likely electorate is going to look like, and we're able to do that because since we're on the phone, we are able to establish quotas. And so what that means is if I just took the first 300 people who picked up the telephone, about 85% of my sample would probably be age 65 plus. The reason for that is people age 65 plus are the most likely to take either phone or email surveys. An electorate is not going to be 85% age 65 plus. So when I hit my seniors quota, then I just no longer talk to people who are age 65 plus, and I focus on other parts of the electorate. So that's the difference. Again, I'm going to walk through both. You're going to see that the data is different in each, and that's the reason for it, because they're both incredibly powerful tools, but one is more informative and the other is more predictive. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. Obviously, there's been a whole host of meetings, and we want to get to the results of that public opinion research. Here you'll see this is what many of you saw, because these mail surveys were mailed to every single registered voter in the district, and this was an example of what those surveys looks like. Again, mailed to every survey in every household in the district, 17 questions. It's used for research, but it is not a scientific poll. It's used for collecting public input. So with that, let's go ahead and get into the results. Here, it's about 40% female, 33% male, and then 21% more than one person in the household completed in the survey. That's often a husband and a wife who are sitting down and filling out the survey together. When we look at the age of the respondents, this gets into why it's not all that close of an approximation to a likely electorate, although this one came in fairly close. The one thing that we fell short on is just 3% of survey respondents were age 18 to 34. We believe, based on past election results, that about 13% of likely voters in June would be age 18 to 34. 27% have a school age or had a school age child in their home. 70% would not. Again, not surprised, being that we were a little low on 18 to 34-year-olds. We think that'll be more like 35-ish, 40% in a potential June election. And then the other thing is we looked at how often people use the Oakland Park. And I think this is one important thing to highlight, is that the electorate as a whole, you're only going to have so many frequent park users. We saw this in the phone survey as well. And so that's a challenge, right? The people, obviously, if we had the only people in the electorate were people who use Oakland Park all the time, we would win no problem. But because you're going to have a good number of people who don't use the ice arena, who aren't using the batting cages, who aren't using the dog park, who aren't using the driving range, that does present a little bit of a challenge. And so what it breaks down is 19% of the mail survey respondents are an Oakland Park user, 81% are not. And then again, talking about why it's not totally representative of a June 22 electorate is because you've got about 23-ish% who are not what we would consider likely voters. In the phone survey, 100% of the respondents are going to be likely voters. How aware are they of the funding proposal? 51% say they've seen, read, or heard a lot or some about it. That's a little bit lower than we typically see, but one reason for that is because we pressed pause on this during COVID. We were talking on Tuesday night that, hey, it's hard to believe the last time we were all together in person, although actually I wasn't there at the time, I wasn't quite on board, but Paul had been with the district staff and some other folks, was February of 2020. And obviously, the month after February of 2020, we all know that COVID hit. So there's a little bit of a lull in terms of people hearing about this because that pause button was pressed. And so that's why we believe we didn't get quite as high on that a lot sum as we often see.
Can I cut in
Yeah, go
on
ahead.
that?
Sure.
Because we did 39 meetings or something like that. So I don't know that that's, it doesn't seem to me like that's an accurate answer. Because we did those meetings all over again. So what?
Sure. What it could mean, it could mean a couple things. It could be that even though that you're doing the meetings, obviously, but we had 2,000 people who responded to this, and so there's probably a good number of that who never attended any of these meetings. It's just not something that was necessarily the referendum or the potential facility improvements are not something that are quite as top of mind in this district as they are. Although I will say, when we get to the phone survey, you'll see this number is a little bit higher. But we do typically see it higher in the mail survey. In the phone survey, it is higher than 51%. Next thing is, this is one of the more important questions that we ask. It's what we call our grade the district question. What letter grade would you give Park Ridge Park District? 12% A, 41% B, so 53% give it an A or a B. Typically, the reason this question is so important is it's very predictive of election results. The number who grade the district, whether it's a school district, a park district, a library district, an A or a B, typically very closely mirrors what the referendum gets overall. About a quarter of the electorate, 23%, gave the district a C, 9% a D or an F. Those D or F voters, those are voters that we're never going to get. And then 14% either don't know or did not give an answer. Another important question, how confident are you that the district is handling taxpayer monies wisely? About 51%, which is pretty solid. Again, you'll see this number is a little bit higher in the phone survey. Again, if you're in the high 30s, 40% in terms of very or somewhat confident, it's going to be that much more challenging to pass a referendum. And another thing that's important is that 18% who don't know. We always talk a lot about how important it is to, during this entire process, to be very transparent, to let people know that they will always be aware of how the money would be being spent if the referendum is to pass. And that's so important for those 18% of voters who say they do not know, because guess what? That's a group that you have the opportunity to convince that they should have confidence in the way that the district handles taxpayer money. Another thing that we do, and we do this on both the mail survey and the phone survey, is ask voters to rank their priorities. What is most important to them in terms of some of the things, the facility improvements that the district is considering? And we ask them to rank it on a 1 to 5 scale, what's called a Likert scale. And the 3 things that come to the top are upgrading the ice arena, creating a new half-mile outdoor walking path, and constructing an indoor turf field at Oakland Park. What's really important and what's really unique in these results is it's not always the case that the top priorities are also the items that cost the most money. A lot of times the items that cost the most money come in and more in the middle, and there's some lower cost items that are at the top. That is not the case here, and that's actually encouraging because it shows that voters, and again, this is pretty much mirrored in the phone survey, as we'll get to in a little bit, but it shows that voters are placing the highest priority on the items that are going to end up costing the most. Another thing that we do is that we test arguments on both sides of the proposal. We test arguments in favor, and then we also test arguments against. And we make every effort to make the arguments against just as strong, just as tough as the arguments in favor. a lot of times clients will say, hey, let's really put our best foot forward, but why are these other ones so strong? Or that's not going to be true. Even if it's not necessarily 100% true, it doesn't mean that that's not what the opposition is going to say. So it is really helpful to know what messages on the in favor side are the strongest, but also to know what potential opposition messages are the strongest as well, because what does that enable you to do? Prepare responses to those arguments against a potential proposal. So what were the arguments, the top arguments in favor? First one is that basically it's time that repairs and renovations at the 52-year-old Oakland Ice Arena, we need them to extend the ice rink's useful life, update and improve accessibility of the restrooms, locker rooms, and other sport facilities, and it's a fair and reasonable request. One item that I think is really important in that message is the fact that it's a 52-year-old Oakland Ice Arena. If the proposal is to go forward, more or less as drafted, I think anytime the arena is mentioned, 52-year-old should be mentioned right there with it. Right behind it, in terms of the top argument, is what constructing the indoor turf field would do. It would relieve pressure on other facilities. It would expand program opportunities.
Jim,
yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Could you put your PowerPoint in presentation mode? That would really help with visibility. Great, thank you.
Is this better?
Yeah.
It's not better yet. Where were we? Oh, you know what? Let me see if I can get this one thing out of the way. All right, there we go. Okay, now everyone can probably see this better, right? Okay, here we go. And then right behind, these are the priorities. We already went over that. Arguments in favor. Here we go. And then so right behind the funding and repairs of the ice arena is constructing that indoor turf field. And the way that we like to measure things, how strong an argument is we look at that, combine that 4 and 5, right? So we combine the 25 and the 31, that adds up to 56%. 56% what we like to term intensity of support or intensity of convincing. And anything above, when we add that 4 and 5 together, anything above about 35, sometimes 30% is considered a particularly strong message. When we get up above 50, like it is with Oakland Ice Arena, that's really, really strong. And then it's 44% for what constructing that indoor turf field would do. And then I think one thing that's important about that turf field message is how it stresses that it will expand recreation opportunities for our residents. And you'll see when we get to in the phone survey, we emphasize that it's all residents. I think that's something that's going to be potentially really important, is talking about what facility improvements can do for the entire district, for the entire community. So clearly those are the top two messages. And then also you amplify the ice arena, the first ice arena message that's saying, hey, it also makes sense to add in amenities. You include the studio rink, indoor turf field, again, expand the recreational opportunities, and then to also improve the facility's financial performance. Not testing quite as strongly are improving the dog park and the driving range. And then, as I mentioned, always like to look at the arguments in opposition. One thing that has certainly come up in these community meetings and that we've heard is the concern about potential tree loss. Approximately 32 mature trees being lost. Cutting down healthy trees for the sake of facility growth is unacceptable. You get to 30% very convincing, and then 44% when you combine that 4 or 5. So that's certainly something that we are going to want to respect, that's a concern to voters. And then also that adding that indoor turf field to the facility raises costs, it expands parking, it relocates the dog park and removes the batting cages. The costs associated with that new amenity outweigh the benefits. That's very similar, tests very similar to the trees message. So it's pretty clear that those are the top two messages in opposition. It's also followed by the project not being of value to the individual taxpayer. To me as a taxpayer, you don't see it as something that's going to benefit you. Obviously, that's also always a concern of voters. And then there's a couple other messages that we tested in the phone survey that we'll get to in a little bit that also are worth keeping in mind. Open Space Fund. We tested this. Should we add an additional $1 million to the funding proposal currently being considered to create an open space fund for future land purposes should an opportunity become available? There was no specific parcel of land identified. This is not particularly strongly supported. It's 38% yes, 52% no. And what's really important to highlight is, again, I mentioned earlier what we call intensity of support. 15% say definitely yes, 32%, so more than 2 to 1, say definitely no. When you're losing on intensity like that, it means it's something that the public just generally does not support. Also, we always like to test tax sensitivity, and we like to be as clear as we can be. You know, the median property value right now in the Park District per the census numbers that came out last summer is $437,000. So from that median tax value, the annual tax impacts would be about $9 per month. How concerned are you about the tax impact? 23% extremely concerned, 14% very concerned, 38% not very concerned. So here you don't see that intensity gap that we saw with the Open Space Fund. Instead, the intensity gap is on the side of not very concerned, right? It's 38% not very concerned compared to 23% extremely concerned. And so then we went ahead and we tested the proposal. And again, we try to be as clear as we can and to test as close of an approximation to the actual referendum as possible. The reason for that is a lot of times clients will ask, hey, why don't you make it a little simpler, right? Why don't you just say, hey, there might be a referendum, here's what it would cost, here's what it would do, why do we have to use all this fancy language? And the reason for that is because we want to approximate what people are actually going to see on the ballot. What they see if they choose to use a mail-in ballot, what they see if they choose to still go to the ballot box. We want it to be as close to that as possible. That's how we've found we can get the most accurate survey results. What we see here on the mail survey is 48% yes, 46% no. So pretty much split right down the middle. As I mentioned, Paul and I have done work on referenda all over the state of Illinois for many, many years. And what we have learned is that in Illinois, mail survey results tend to be about 8 to 10 points worse than what we see in the phone survey. And again, the phone survey is what does the best job of being a more predictive tool. So 48, 46, hey, is that a number you're going to be jumping up and down about? No, but remember, it's likely 8 to 10 points worse than what the actual current place for the electorate is, and we'll see that in the phone survey results as well. Break it down by different demographic groups. Really no split by gender here. 52-44 among men, 52-41 among women. It's those who chose not to respond to this or who had more than one person responding where the numbers are a little bit lower. Again, that's something that's very typical. When two people are filling out the survey together, they tend to be a little more cost averse than someone filling it out on their own. When we look at it by age, we get what the 18 to 24 over on the left, I wouldn't pay much attention to that. That's just n equals 7. That's such a small sample size that it isn't really worth paying attention to. So what I want to draw your attention to is 25 to 34 through 75 plus. And that dark gray number, that's the definitely yes. And we see this all the time. It's almost like a ski slope, right? You start at 41%. Definitely yes among 25 to 34. And look, you can just draw a line and it gradually gets smaller the older the voters get. Again, very, very common. It is almost always the case that it is voters age 65 plus, what we call seniors, who are least likely to support any type of referendum. They're the most challenging group, and they're also a very important group because guess what? In almost any election, who is most likely to turn out? Voters age 65 plus. They are what we call most likely to be what you call super voters. So it's always, always important to pay attention to where seniors are on an issue. If you can tie or even get 40% yes with seniors, you'll win almost any referendum you ever try to pass. Likely versus unlikely voter. The likely voters, 47-47. The unlikely voters, and again, this is for a June election, 51-44. Why the difference? Well, the biggest reason is, guess what? Likely voters, they tend to be a little bit older than the unlikely voters. And as we saw, it's the older voters who are least likely to currently support the referendum. Again, no surprise here. If you have a school-age child in your home, you're pretty strongly in favor, 59-38. If you do not, 45-48. If you do have that school-age child, very simply, you're more likely to get use of some of these new facility improvements at the park. So it stands to reason that you'll be more likely to support it. By district grade, I touched on this a little bit earlier when we got to this. Well, look, if you get district an A, 44% definitely yes, another 27% probably yes, so that's 71% total yes. If you get a district a B, 27% definitely yes, 33% probably yes, that's 60%. So, hey, very strong support with those voters, but then look at the difference when you get even to the voters who give it a C, it's just 35% yes, and then only 12% yes with those who give the district your D and an F. Why this question tends to be so important, because it really is very, very predictive of support. Tax sensitivity, no surprise here. If you're concerned about the tax impact, you're not voting yes. If you're not concerned, you are voting yes. Oakland Park users versus non, 66-31 among those who use the park, 43-49 among those who do not. But remember, in the mail survey, just 19% are Oakland Park users. So the bulk, 81% electorate, say that they are not users of the park. So, you know, how does the math work that you can win? If you can tie with those who do not use the park, you will win, because you're going to get such strong support from those who do use the park. We also asked a question, hey, so 3 options. We can go with this $31.7 million proposal. We can get rid of the indoor turf field and would make it $23 million, or we should just not go at all. 38% say 31.7, yes, let's go with that. Another 19% say, okay, the 23 million number. So you do see 38 plus 19, you know, those no voters, you get a little bit of sway. Hey, you know, if it comes down a little bit, maybe I'm more likely to support it. And then you've got just over a third, 37%, no referendum. Those are voters that you're never going to get no matter what. So there's 37-ish, 35-ish percent of the electorate who is not going to be with you on this, no matter the size of it. They just do not want a referendum at this time. We also gave some time for some additional thoughts and recommendations on what we call an open-ended question. 60% said no answer. 8% just gave it, or didn't say no answer, they just left it blank. 8% a statement in support. 6% recommended other improvements. Miscellaneous comments, decent number said the scope is too big. Tax or pocketbook concerns, cost of living. That number, 4%, essentially that, hey, it's too much, it's too costly. To be at only 8% there, that's a little lower than we typically see. Some people say they need more information. Others saying this is not something they will use. And then a handful of comments concerned about the trees. Went through various improvements. You know, this does show just how important the park is to the community, how much people put thought into this. I'm not going to go through each one of these, but as you look at them, just recognize that people had a whole host of recommended improvements to the park. So it's certainly something that they're taking some time to think about. Again, more here: disc golf, pickleball, paddleball, roller skating rink, an indoor drive range, bocce. You know, there's no shortage of recommendation improvements to the park. Also, always important to ask about additional information needs. People are curious about the current and projected revenue, the cost breakdown of each part of proposal, any outstanding debt, what the construction schedule would look like, and then projected use of both the rink and the turf fields. So brief summary before we get into the phone survey. And before I get to the phone survey, I will pause and be happy to answer any questions about the mail survey. 18 to 34-year-olds underrepresented. More than 80% do not use the park. Majority confident that the district is handling taxpayer money wisely. Some modest tax sensitivity, 37%, extremely or very concerned. You know, one thing that's pretty instructive is, hey, 37% of respondents were either extremely or very concerned. We hop back a couple pages. How many people are saying absolutely no to the referendum? 37%. And then also strongest arguments in favor, focus on extending the useful life of the arena. Strongest argument against deals with the 32 mature trees that would be lost. Limited support for creating the open space fund. Projects that are the greatest priority: the ice arena, the walking path, and then the indoor turf field. Pretty much evenly split, 48-46, 48% in support, 46% against. Intensity against is a little higher than the intensity of support in the mail survey. And then the ones who are most supportive are not concerned about the tax impact, grade the district an A, 35 to 44. They use the park. Look, All of this really lines up exactly how you would think. It's those with young kids, it's those who use the park, it's those who give the park the highest grades. Least supportive, again, lines up exactly how you'd think. It's the oldest voters, those who don't have a school-aged child in the home, and those who are extremely concerned about the tax impact. And so with that, as Paul said, support level in mail surveys previously conducted have historically been lower than the final results on election day. We do believe, especially when coupled with the phone results, that would be the case here. For this to be successful, it would definitely require a strong campaign, strong what we call GOTV, or get out the vote efforts focused on those 18 to 44-year-olds who, if we do go in June, do not participate in primary elections. And then other efforts would be focused on those older voters and then those who do not have school-aged children and those who do not currently use the park. So with that, I will take I know I move reasonably quickly, but I always like to be mindful of people's time. But we'll pause and happy to answer any questions that folks may have about the mail survey before I get into the results of the phone survey.
Oh, I just want to make a comment in general. This is Cindy. I think the way you ask questions would determine how you get your answers. And so Rob and I talked a little bit about the open space fund, and it sounds kind of like a slush fund. If it was more known that we had a need for certain areas to have green space or a green space identified, I think it would test higher. And I think just all the questions in general, how you ask them determines how you get your answers.
I think that you are exactly right. You can always, how you ask things are incredibly determinative of the responses you get. What we make every effort to do is to be as straightforward in how we ask things as possible. As I mentioned, that's why we always have the closest approximation to the ballot referenda as possible, because that's what we want to do. I could write a question that says, as you may know, the Oakland Ice Arena is aging and many sports teams are not able to practice because of the lack of the indoor turf field. Knowing this, would you favor or oppose a $31.7 million referendum? If I ask it like that, guess what? The numbers would be a little bit higher because we're identifying the problem before we give the solution. We don't like to do that because that's not accurate, and it doesn't do anybody any good to get numbers that are a little bit higher than they actually would be in reality. And so that is always our effort, to do everything that we can to be as fair, as neutral as possible. Similarly, one thing that we're able to do on the phone survey you can't do on a mail survey is we rotate and randomize questions. So, I talked about the arguments in favor and the arguments in support. On the phone survey, we randomize the order that each argument is asked in, and then also we rotate it so half the sample gets the arguments in favor first, half the sample gets the arguments in opposition first. And the reason that we do that is, again, to be as neutral as we possibly can be. Other questions that folks may have?
I have a question. It's Matt Coyne. Just to be clear, the questions concerning the turf field and where we got the discrepancy between whether people would want the ice arena without the turf field or with the turf field. I'm assuming there was no indication given to the respondents of what the revenue from the turf field would be bringing in. It was just whether you wanted it or not.
That is correct. Yeah, we did not include, by eliminating the turf field, you would also be losing X dollars of revenue. Nothing like that was included.
Thank you.
Okay, well, on to the results of the phone survey. As I mentioned, phone survey, and we also collected email respondents as well. So it's what we call a hybrid survey. It's of 300 likely voters with the goal to be the closest approximation of what a June 2022 electorate would look like. How do we identify that? The best way to identify a likely voter for an election is by looking at past election results, who turned out. The best predictor of turning out is if you've done it before. A couple other things to note is that a question I get all the time is, well, if you just call landlines, you're not going to get me because I don't have a landline anymore. We are very much aware of that, and now the majority of the interviews that we do, I think in this survey it ended up being about 60% of the 300 interviews were conducted what we call cell phone respondents, so with voters who are on their cell phones. When I started in this business a long time ago, we only called people on landlines because you could. Obviously, you can't do that anymore. We're at, in surveys, depending on the geographic area, about 50 to 60% of our interviews now are conducted with cell phone respondents. And then we were in the field November 13th through 21st, so not too long ago. As I mentioned here, this is even more wordy legal language than it is on the phone survey. Shall the Ridge Park District, Cook County, Illinois, renovate the 52-year-old Oakland Ice Arena for the purpose of paying a call? I mean, very, very legalese language. But again, the reason we do this is because this is what people are going to see on the ballot. And then what result did we get? 56% yes, 33% no. Hey, look, it's always good to be up above 50%. We like to see, to say that we have a pretty solid chance of passing, we like to be at least 55%, and there's a couple reasons for that. First, it is extremely difficult to move a no voter to yes. It's also pretty tough to move an undecided voter to yes. So when I look at a 56% yes result, the way I think about this is not as a 23-point advantage, but really what's closer to about a 10-point advantage, because all these people who are undecided, and some of this chunk of probably yes, are going to break towards no. And that is true for any referenda, whether it's a small local referenda or if it's statewide referenda in California where hundreds and hundreds of $millions are spent on both sides. You still have a very, very difficult time moving a no voter to yes. So when I look at this, I almost look at it as like 55-45 to start rather than 56-33. Another thing to point out is nice lead, even if we're going with my 55 to 45 number, 10-point advantage, but look at the difference in intensity. 25% definitely yes, 22% definitely no. So only a 3-point difference in intensity. Again, this shows this will be, it's certainly a referendum that has a path to passing, but it's going to be a challenge. You have, that 31% probably yes. That's a lot of voters who are saying, yeah, I guess I'll vote for this. What you would like to see to be even more confident is that definitely yes number up above 30-35%. Also break it down by partisanship. And again, this is very common. This is what we typically see. Who is most in support? Democrats. They're at 69-23. Who are a little more challenging? Republicans and independents. Republicans at 53-41, independents at 47-38. Again, almost always the case where Democrats are more in support of a tax increase than Republicans or independents are. Breaking it down by gender age group, men 18 to 54, women 18 to 54, almost no difference. When you look at what we call the difference score, a little higher yes vote among women 18 to 54, but also a little higher no vote, but very strong support with both those groups. Men age 55 plus, women 55 plus, fighting to basically a draw with them. And then seniors, it's a 15-point gap, 38% yes, 53% no. By children in the household, 64-27 with those who have kids in the household, 50-38 with those who do not. So that's a 25-point difference there. No real difference by those who have a kid in the household by if their kid is younger, K through 6, or in middle or high school. What we always like to do is we break the electorate down into 3 groups. Those who are definitely yes, 25% of the electorate. Those who are definitely no, 22%. And then in this case, it's more than half, 53% of voters who are what we call swing, who are neither definitely yes or definitely no. That's a pretty high number. A lot of times a swing group is 35 to 40%. So to be at 53% shows that this is a referendum that would potentially, if it does go on the ballot, really require an effort to persuade those swing voters to ultimately vote yes. Who are the definitely yes voters? Again, it's those with kids in the household, confident in how the district handles taxpayer money, and those who are age 45 to 64. Definitely no voters, Republicans, older men, not confident in how the district handles taxpayer money, and seniors. Swing groups, these are the most important. Those who are somewhat confident in how the district handles taxpayer money, age 18 to 44, men 18 to 54, and then also Democrats here. So you've got a lot of Democrats. You know, obviously Democrat support was well above 60% when we broke it down. But what this tells us, that this high of a number in the swing group, are that there's a lot of Democrats who are just probably yes voters, who are still going to require a little bit of persuasion. Also, always like to see what we call the open-ended responses are. So we just ask, what are the 1 or 2 main reasons why you would vote yes on this proposal? Then we don't read any choices. We just listen to what the respondent says and then code those responses. Needs upgrading. It would be good for the community. More access for children. Like the idea of the indoor field. Good improvements. Even with these yes voters, there still is some concern about paying for it. When you see those numbers, so for example, 28% needs upgrading, that's 28% of that 56%. So it's not 28% of the electorate as a whole, it's a quarter of that 56%. And then the same thing holds true when we look at the 1 or 2 main reasons why you would vote no. Among that 33%, 50% say, hey, it's a tax increase. But again, that's not 50% of the electorate as a whole. That's 50% of that 33%. So it's 16, 17% of the entire electorate. And then right behind, or not right behind that, but still something that we see a lot in the responses is too expensive and that the money could be better spent. Very, very common for these to be the responses when we ask the why would you vote no on the referendum question. Again, always like to be clear about what that tax impact would be. So we read it out to them and say, hey, this is what the average impact would be on the medium household value. 64% say this would not make any difference to me, knowing that exact tax input. 22% say it would actually make them more likely to support it because they say, hey, maybe that's not as much as I thought it would be. And then 11% less likely. So voters are they're not particularly persuaded when we do read them the exact tax impact. Mentioned this earlier, when we asked that confident in handling the taxpayer money wisely question on here, guess what? It's higher than it was on the mail survey. Again, not a surprise. We see that pretty frequently. 69% confident, 26% non-confident. You know, this is one of the few questions in public opinion research where I don't pay much attention to intensity. You see that 16% very confident number. On most other questions, when I see 16%, I say, wow, that's pretty low intensity. For as many referenda polls that I've done, it is almost impossible to get even 25% of an electorate, no matter what the entity is, for voters to say, yeah, I'm very confident in the way they're handling my taxpayer money. It's just not something that voters like to say. So on this question, it's one where I pay much more attention to the total number than I do the intensity numbers. Next, just like we did on the mail survey, ask voters how important the various potential items to be improved with funding are. Extremely, very, somewhat, not very important. And what we see is that, guess what comes to the top? Very similar to what we saw in the mail survey. Number 1, 53%, extremely, very important. Upgrading the 52-year-old Oakland Ice Arena. Right behind that, building the indoor field. And then right behind that, adding the new half-mile outdoor running and walking path. What this shows is a couple things that I want to point out. First is that the importance of specifics. This isn't just saying, hey, we're going to upgrade the 52-year-old Oakland Ice Arena. It goes and spells out exactly what the improvements, the updates would mean, and also specifies that each of the areas that would be improved, the bathrooms, the locker rooms, the lobby area, are outdated and in need of improvements. This isn't something that's being done just to do it. It's something that's being done because it's needed. And then the second thing is, when we look at the indoor turf field, this was a little different language than we use in the mail survey, and I think it's important, is it says improve programming for all age groups, emphasizing that, hey, this is something that anyone who uses the park is going to benefit from, and then that also it eases current gymnasium capacity issues, so it makes clear that there are current capacity issues. Again, it's highlighting the importance, the urgency of making these types of repairs. Not quite as important to voters, adding the multi-purpose rooms, moving the dog park, and improving the driving range. Those are supported about half as much in terms of extremely or very important as the ice arena is, for example. And then what we always like to do is to go through and say, okay, what's most important? Definitely yes voters. Mirrors the overall electorate. Upgrading the ice arena, building the indoor turf field. Definitely no voters. Still important to see, even though these are voters that we're pretty much never going to get. Still important to see that, hey, it's that 52-year-old ice arena that they even say, hey, only 15% say it's extremely very important to them, but there is at least some recognition among that group. Swing voters, the most important group, again, they look just like the overall electorate with upgrading the ice arena and building the indoor turf field, 1 and 2, adding the new half-mile running and walking path. That's important too, but that's 33% among swing voters, whereas the arena and the indoor turf field are 55 and 50 respectively. Break it down among parents, among moms and dads, and then always also like to look among seniors. And you've even got 40% of seniors, the toughest group, saying that it's extremely very important to them to upgrade the ice arena. And then coming towards the end here, again, just like the mail survey, we tested arguments in favor and arguments in opposition. Now, as I mentioned, we're going to the arguments in favor first, but the respondents on the telephone, half got the arguments in favor first, the other half got the arguments in opposition first, and each individual argument was randomized. Which is the top support statement? Top one involves the indoor turf field. It will mean more year-round sports and recreation opportunities for the entire community, includes open play times for young children, indoor walking opportunities for all ages. 3 things that message does, and it's similar: entire community, open play, indoor walking for all ages. Each one of those is something that, like, hey, says in a different way, this is something the entire community stands to benefit from. That's why you get all the way up to 48% very convincing, which is a really strong intensity number. The next one, hey, the ice arena is 52 years old. Any facility that old will need to be either replaced or renovated, and then highlights that the district is choosing to renovate it because it will continue to provide and expand indoor ice skating to the community. And then the pros and improvements will significantly expand sports and recreation opportunities for all age groups. Facility will no longer be just about ice skating, again, highlighting how it can benefit more of the community. And then finally, the other message that tops that 40% very convincing threshold, this will mean that district residents can stay in their community for these indoor recreation needs rather than being forced to drive to other communities. Messages that didn't work quite as well, involving the studio ice rink, benefiting the facility's financial performance. It's a fair, reasonable request. That's just pretty straightforward. And then again, we see that the golf driving range and the dog park, they just don't quite move the needle. And we've seen that pretty consistently as much as the ice arena and the indoor turf field do. And then again, broke down the various messages, how they worked with all the different groups. Always like to look at swing voters. Top messages among swing voters, the same as they were among the electorate overall. Number 1, indoor turf field. Right behind that, the fact that the ice rink is 52 years old and because of the age would obviously need renovations. Arguments against. As I mentioned, there is one message that we tested in the survey that we did not test in the mail survey, that we tested in the phone and email survey, and it's this one. We are just beginning to recover from the COVID-19 pandemic, and the prices of consumer goods are increasing rapidly. This is the wrong time to be increasing taxes in order to pay for improved parks and recreation facilities. When I write the opposition messages, what I always like to do is put myself in the mind, hey, what would I say if I was on the other side of this? This message is exactly what I would say if I was on the other side of it. Not a surprise that it hits 35%, very convincing. It's the best one on the opposition side. That said, we've got 4 messages in favor that test better than this one. So yes, this is a strong message, but there's 4 messages on the other side that are more effective. The trees message does not work as well on the phone survey as it did in the mail survey. The fact that the ice arena serves a small percentage of the district residents, again, certainly something to be mindful of. 49% of the electorate, so right at half, find it convincing, but it doesn't quite hit a strong intensity number. District trying to do too much at once. Already plenty of parks and recreation facilities in the district. Those 2 messages, again, just not quite as strong as the, hey, we're just beginning to recover, prices are rising, this isn't the right time. And so then we always ask what I call our informed ballot. So our initial ballot was 5633. Our informed ballot, after you hear the various priorities, after you hear the arguments on both sides, we get to 5932. So a little bit of movement. That's slight movement. I mean, that's a net 4 points of movement. That's pretty common with referenda. Again, it's just incredibly difficult to move voters too much from either undecided or no to a yes vote. So it's actually pretty encouraging to see that we got at least a slight uptick. Also tested the open space fund here. Very, very similar language to what we used on the mail survey. As someone mentioned earlier, no, we did not get into exactly what the open space fund would mean. Yes, if we had phrased it a little differently, there might be a difference in the results. The way we did phrase it, 49-49, 49% favor, 49% opposed. Intensity on the side of the opposition by 6 points, 26% strongly opposed, 20% strongly in favor. Where does the open space struggle? You know, it's just below 50% with both Republicans and independents, but then you also see a drop off even among Democrats. If you remember, we were up above, well above 60% on the referendum with Dems. Here, we're at 59%.
And Jim, can I ask how you get independent information? Because the voter rolls, aren't they generally either Republican or Democrat?
So Illinois is not a voter registration state, so there is no flag on the voter roll or what we call the voter file for whether someone is a Republican or an independent or a Democrat, because you don't have to register by party in Illinois. And so what we do is we just ask people. We say, do you consider yourself a Republican, a Democrat, or an independent? And then we ask the strength of their partisanship. Are they strong Republican, soft Republican, lean Republican, etc.? And then what we also are able to do is we look at past election results in the Park District to make sure that we're about where we should be on terms of the split of Republicans and Democrats. So that's how we're able to do it in Illinois. Other states, Iowa, for example, to use one that's nearby, they register by party. So, you know, if there's a Park District in Illinois, I can tell you exactly what party it is.
We register for the primary, so I thought that's where you got it, but this is self-identified.
Correct. And even the primary, you don't have, you choose the ballot that you're going to select, but you can, you know, if you voted in a Republican primary last year, you can go and vote in the Democratic primary the next year. Yeah. And then we also looked at it, the open space fund by children in the household. And what we see is under 50 with those who do not have a child in the household, still above 50 with those who do, 57%, but not as quite as high as the referenda was. And then here's a question. So this is similar to the 3-option question that we asked on the mail survey. More likely or less likely to support a district funding proposal if the cost was reduced from 31.7 to 23 by eliminating the addition of the indoor field, or would it make no difference to you? 20% would be more likely to support it, 16% less likely, and then 64% say, hey, that would make no difference to me. We test questions like this a lot, in often folks are surprised how high that no difference number is. They think that they would be, you know, dropping it by $8 million, so by about 25%, a little more than that, would really have an effect on voters. What we have found over the years that it's almost like when you're a yes voter, you're a little bit in for a dime, in for a dollar. And that also, you know, some yes voters, you know, they're going to say less likely, even though the price is dropping, because the reason they're a yes voter is that indoor turf field. They might not have a hockey player. Hockey might not be important to them. So losing that turf field, they say that, hey, why am I going to vote for this? So that's why you always see that high no difference number at 64%.
Can I ask about that? Are you
Sure,
asking yes voters that question? Or are you asking
everybody, the entire electorate? So all N equals 300.
If you were already no, you could change to yes.
Or you could be if you were already no, you could be more likely. I'd be like, oh, okay, you know, I wasn't there for 31.7, but get it down to 23. Okay, yeah, I'm more likely to vote for that. But if you're already yes, and then you hear, whoa, the reason I was yes is because of the turf field, then you would be less likely, even though you're already a yes voter. But the majority, 64%, are saying, hey, dropping that makes no difference to me. I'm either dead set on no or I'm dead set on yes.
So you're saying it's a wash?
Correct.
Is it a wash?
Right, yeah. You got 20% more likely, 16% less likely. Yeah, a wash is certainly a fair way to describe it. And so wrapping up, key points. The ballot measure is above 50%, but intensity is soft. There's just a quarter. 25% are saying they would definitely vote yes. So passing this would or will require a strong campaign. This is not a, this isn't one that we tested where it's 67% yes with 40% definitely yes. This is, it's far from a slam dunk, but at the same time, hey, starting up above 50 is a good place to be. The most popular items are upgrading the Oakland Ice Arena, followed by building an indoor turf field. These two items should be the centerpiece of a potential campaign effort. Again, this is pretty rare to have the most expensive items be the items that are most the highest priorities for voters. I've worked in other park districts where they're renovating an ice arena, and let's say that was going to cost $15 million. The most important was a $1 million improvement on a different part of the park district that was more of like a nature area. And what we spend the whole time saying is like, hey, yeah, we know it's the ice arena that's got, the hockey parents excited, but everything that we do, we have to mention this nature area too, because that's what voters are most persuaded by. This is not that type of referenda. The big budget items are the items that the voters are placing the most priority of. There should also be an emphasis on the relatively low tax impact of the proposal, especially since we already have voters voicing concerns about rising prices. Again, this is when it's important to be as transparent as possible. Hey, this is what the actual tax increase is going to look like. And then this data with the way, and it's the same as the mail survey, it does not support an additional $1 million for that open space fund from this data. So with that, let me pull this back up, see if I can get you guys to see me again, and I will answer any questions that folks may have. Yeah. So,
Jim, can I ask you a question? This is Gary Martin.
Yes.
I know I talked to you a little bit in between the meeting last time. It sounds like your stratified sample was targeted for a June election. How much does it apply to a November election, you think?
I think that the short answer is it does, for a couple of reasons. One is because every single person that we talked to, if they're going to vote in the June 22 election, they're going to vote in the November 22 election. So that's one thing that is true. Second thing is that a November election will almost certainly be a friendlier electorate than a June 22 election. How do I know that? Because I can guarantee you that it will be a younger electorate. There will be a higher number of voters age 18 to 54 in November than there will be in June. That's true in every single election in every single place in the country. I don't know if I would bet my life on this, but I'd be pretty close to guaranteeing that there's never been a primary electorate that is younger than a general electorate. So if the voters most likely to support you, age 18 to 44, kids in the household, there's going to be more of those people showing up in a general electorate than there are in a primary electorate.
Thanks. I think that's what swayed some of us to lean toward the November election then.
For board
Other questions
members,
that folks might have?
I believe Gary is representing the task force. For those of you who haven't met Gary Martin, he was on the task force, and I believe he'll probably be presenting next. Are there any questions from the board? I guess not. Are we ready to go to the next section then, Gail?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, I will stop sharing my screen, and thank you guys so much. Oh,
Thank you.
And the one other thing I would say is I'm sticking around for at least the next couple of agenda items, so I'll be here to answer any additional questions that folks may have.
I told him he can go after that so he doesn't have to listen to the budget part of the meeting. But thank you so much, Jim. You did a great job of summarizing that presentation. And that's why I said, I'm sure the board, needs to absorb, as the staff does, all of this data. It's great data for the task force, for the board, the staff, and the community. So speaking of the community, I'm just thrilled that we had such great diversity in terms of representation, and a very spirited conversation the other evening on our task force. And so I will turn it over at this time to two of our members. I don't know who's speaking first, or one speaking, or Edward.
Ed took the notes, and I'll probably supplement if that's okay.
It's great. It's great. So Ed Mann and Gary Martin, take it away.
Okay. We were asked to consider 3 questions in our breakout groups. The first was, should the Park District place a bond referendum on the ballot next year? And we were not unanimous on this, but everyone, there was 1 no vote and 1 undecided, and everybody else said yes, we should go ahead and place the bond referendum on the ballot. The second question was, if the Park District decides to place a bond referendum on the ballot next year, should the district pursue a June or a November election? I think most of us started out, or at least a good number of us started out thinking June was our best bet, just get moving, whatever momentum we have. But as we looked at the data that was presented to us, the argument of having a more favorable electorate in November than we would have in June carried a lot of weight. And so even though the November election would have a much higher noise factor, because you're going to have all these other state offices, state and federal offices on the ballot, we felt that we would have a better chance with the electorate who's going to come forward in November. So we recommended the November date rather than the June date. And the third question was, if the Park District pursues a referendum next year, what should appear on the ballot? The $31.7 million proposal that was tested in the mail survey and the phone poll, or something different? And again, we felt that given the data presented to us from the mail survey and the phone survey, the fact that the high ticket items gathered the most support indicated to us that we should go and request the full $31.7 million proposal. If it doesn't pass, we can always retool it and come back the following April. But we felt that since the Oakland ice rink and the turf field seemed to be gather the most support in the survey, it was worth going for the full project.
For the benefit. Go ahead. Gary,
I got a couple quick points then. Everything that Ed said, I totally in agreement with. For the minority discussion, I do want to mention that it seems like the kind of perf is something that should still obviously be discussed in terms of its degree of toxicity, and you'll obviously decide about that later. And the other thing that came up was if there was any, there might be more support if there were times when public skating could have some free sessions. It might not cost that much, given a lot of people already have passes that would be coming anyway. But if there was a few times during the year where there was sessions that were allowed for people that didn't have a pass and couldn't afford to pay, that seemed it might help with some of the people that were a little reluctant, having tax dollars focused on something that a minority of people in the district use. Otherwise, it sounds to me like, as much as I think I've talked to some board members, gee, 20, a lower cost ticket might sell better. It looks like, as Jim has said, the bigger package seems to sell just as well as a small one. So it seems like it would be more likely to pass on the first try to go with the bigger package. I think, Cindy, you're right. Some of those people who would say, it doesn't matter to me, $9 a month, $6.50 a month, doesn't matter to me. Some of those people are saying that because they're going to vote no matter what. And it sounds like the yes voters, doesn't matter to them that much either. They're going to vote yes either way. But there's obviously more advantage to having the bigger offering. Does the board have any questions for Ed and I?
Well, for the benefit of those who weren't at the meeting, I think there were 9 or 10 participants there, maybe 10 at the beginning and 9 at the decision making. So that I think affects the decision. And I do have a question of how many people who made those decisions are heavy users of Oakland and how many were not.
In my table, there was baseball, which is not a heavy user of Oakland, other than the batting cage, I guess, a little bit. Hockey, I'm involved in speed skating. Ed is more generic, probably with figure skating.
All figure skating, little hockey. The
Yeah.
hockey rep was Maine Township Hockey, which
Right,
is
that's
not
true.
as heavy a user of Oakland as some of the other hockey organizations. And I don't have full data on all 10 people.
Yeah, the other people at the other table didn't get to meet them, so I can't speak for them. I will say that people did try to put on multiple hats, including their statesman hat, and not looking at just their own personal interests or close family interests, but what would be good for the district as a whole and for Park Ridge. I mean, we think about the kids, kids that cause trouble at Hinckley Park, can we get them into more activities?
Can we move them to Oakland Park? Just kidding. No, thank you for that summary.
Any other questions for the task force members? Okay. Hopefully you guys can stick around for the discussion part. And I turn it, Cindy, do you want to have a discussion at this point? Open it up to the board?
I think that's on the agenda. Sure, I'll open it up. I'll moderate the discussion. Anybody want to start off with observations, questions, thoughts? Did anyone get to read, did everyone get to read this that was on the table? I don't think it was mailed out to all the commissioners, the community, the feedback from the community meetings. I think that would be helpful to send out to the commissioners. I know John read it. I don't know if the task force got to read it or not.
It was on the table, but I'm not sure that many people, although there was some slides that summarized high points to that in the presentation.
Yeah, I thought it was very interesting.
All right, I'll pass it out to the full task force and to the board.
Okay.
I'll send it out tomorrow.
And another thing, Cindy, I think you made a comment, since we're on that subject of the community meetings, about that we had gotten out to so many, which is very true. And I think it had a big effect. The attendance at those meetings was challenging. And I think a lot due to COVID and just, in general, right? So even though we went to so many meetings, there wasn't, as you look at the numbers, there weren't a ton of people that we touched at those meetings, but not that I'm sorry we did it. We would do, some more information meetings, if this were to progress.
So what you're saying is if we would have done this in 2020, we would have touched more people at the same amount of meetings.
I'm not sure, but I'm not sure. I just think it speaks to that 50%, where Jim said maybe that's a little lower than we'd like to see. I think that was probably some challenges we were still having this fall.
I also have some insight into that. I just didn't want to interrupt Jim when he was talking. We were working with Paul and not Jim at that point, but in February and March of 20, we did 2 other mailings. So we did a letter mailing with the fact sheet, and then we did a newsletter with frequently asked questions, and then that follow-up was supposed to be the survey. So you got 2 mailings and then the survey. So with this long 1.5 year pause, we didn't have it butting up to those 2 mailings. So they're not going to remember that they got that 1.5 years ago.
Good point.
And then we
Margaret.
also had information in the printed brochure, and we don't print that brochure anymore. So there is that delay, I think, actually is what dropped that awareness level.
That's good information. Anybody want to say something? Go on, Matt.
Yeah. I just want to, first of all, thank the task force for their hard work over the last however many years it is now, trying to trying to come up with a plan. And then I did want to say something. It's more of a comment than a question, but I appreciate the idea that the referendum may have, appeal to more voters in November than in June. I come to the same conclusion, but for a different reason, just because voter turnout is generally better in November. And my goal has always been, with regard to this referendum and anything else, is that if we really want public opinion, we should send it to the voters when we are most likely to get the most number of voters, not the most number of voters that are going to vote yes. So I appreciate that you came to that conclusion. I just wanted to make the point that from my opinion, it's the right decision to do it that way. But because voter turnout is generally much higher in November than in June.
And there was a slide that showed the numbers. I don't know, Jim, did we talk about that slide and I missed it tonight, or it was like the percent?
Let me see if I've got it.
Because that might be important to point out to your point.
Yeah, so when we look at past elections, for example, this is just using the 2018 for the most recent non-presidential even year election. In the primary, 34% of the electorate was age 18 to 54. In the general, 45% of the electorate was age 15 to 54. Obviously this kind of goes without saying, but it's worth highlighting these numbers too. In the primary, 66% of the electorate is age 55 plus. In the general, 55% of the electorate is age 55 plus. Obviously, you could have done that math with the 18 to 54, but it just does show the difference in turnout by age in a primary electorate and a general election.
See, I think it was a different
Jim, could you highlight the numbers of voters? Because my recollection was like more than double in the general or something like that.
Yep. So in a primary, in 2018 primary, 8,302 voters in the Park Ridge Park District. In general, 17,825. So yes, I'm not sure if you said it was more than double, but that's exactly right. More than double in a general than in a primary.
Thank you. That's what I was looking for.
Sure.
So it accomplishes two things, more voters that Matt wanted, and also more likely to pass because of the age difference. My question with waiting to November is, and pardon the pun, but we're kind of skating on thin ice over there.
That's a good one.
So we were already looking at a 2024 build date. What does pushing this off to November of next year do, especially if it doesn't pass?
You can move it out 5 months. Terry, correct me if I'm wrong. Go ahead. That's right?
Yeah, it does. It basically just pushes it out 5 months. There obviously is some room for flexibility in there, and some of the kind of follow-up discussion that just really hasn't been totally developed with the architecture team and the staff is, at that point, it gets us closer to an ideal time frame that is preferable for the ice arena staff to be maybe shutting down in March and bidding in a winter situation, and then having it open right before they start again and get busy in the following August. So it could shift it just 5 months. It could shift it a little bit more, where we would be, under construction from, May and March of 2024 to July 2025. So some of those things are a little bit undetermined, but those are some options and some things that need to be kind of worked out.
And I think that to your point about the, what's going on with the mechanicals over there, of course, continues to be a concern, right? And you're pushing it out that many more months. But, another thing to point out to that point is the summer is the lowest use time at the rink. So that would be the time, a lot of the time in between the June and the November referendum. But, just like we're going to do now, if something happens there, we're going to regroup, right? In terms of the mechanicals failing and we can't get the parts. So I think that the situation doesn't change, it pushes it out,
I missed that. What are we doing if if it fails?
We'll regroup and talk about, do we want to just go in and fix the mechanicals if we can't find or we don't have the parts stockpiled? So I think that would be a discussion if it happened, when we're going in June or if we're going in November. But yeah, it puts the risk out there a little further.
Okay, I'll just be the loudmouth. I feel like there's a lot of hesitation to talk. It sounded like I heard more than once in the presentation that it's going to need a strong committee in order for this to pass. So it's not a given that it would pass. So how is that committee built? Who is looking like leaders of that committee? How do we know? How do we know that something's strong? Are there board members that are interested in that? Just throwing out general questions.
I'm trying to write down all your questions. The committee, that's something that is done independently. The Park District would provide the data and the information to this committee, but that's a resident committee, and that is something that Paul would help with. Paul Hanley would help with that committee, and help put that together, but independent of the staff. So it would be, we would certainly, I would guess that he would go to the committee first, and the current task force. I know that there's other residents that have contacted me with their excitement about this project. And so we are taking, a list of names and said that would be the next step if the board would decide to put it on a referendum. So we would, would direct those toward any of the interested residents. That Prospect had a committee as well. So
I know Mel was very involved in that, and he was on the board. I don't want to put something on that's not going to pass. Unlike Matt, he's okay with putting it on either way. I want it, if I put it on, I want it to pass. And I feel like at this point, if it's depending on a committee to be named, that's a pretty big jump to say, well, we're going to give it to this group and they're going to have it pass.
That's a typical way it works in referendums across the country. So that's all I know about it at this point. I mean, we're not to that point of naming a committee or doing any of that till the board makes a decision. So I'm not concerned that there would be, interested residents. I don't know if our two residents, our task force members, have any other input on that at this point and their feelings about that, or?
Yeah, I certainly would be willing to serve on that and help. And I think others who are on the citizen group, certainly in the earlier meetings, there'd be other people too.
I agree, but I think it would be very hard to drum up a number of people if we don't know for sure there's going to be a referendum. I think it will be easier to find people once the decision's made to move forward.
That would have to be, Ed, right? That's how it would work, right? The board would say, this is the direction we want to go, and this is what we want to put on the ballot, and then the next step would be an interested committee. So that's how that would work.
If I can just weigh in with a couple of thoughts, that I've been thinking about. In talking with Terry, and talking about the history of the ice skating rink, it really does seem that the mechanicals and the upkeep of this is, I think, a desire of everybody on the board because of everything that the ice skating rink means to the community. And while there are people who haven't used it recently, it's still an integral part of the offerings of the Park District. So I think we really do need to make that effort to not only make a really concerted effort to get something to pass, but then we also need to think about the urgency of it, because this sort of renovation has been needed for so long. And I'd be reluctant to put it off. I think we've talked in our meetings just maybe it was 2 or 3 months ago about the much greater costs to repair something that fails, that if we don't start to really address this and we continue to put it off, then we're going to need to be thinking about whether or not this program can actually survive. We really need to do something, and preferably sooner than later. I also think that there is a concern about what some people have said, the large cost of the $31 million. And if our overall goal is to try to preserve the ice skating rink and the facilities and the complex as it is, that should be a prime goal, rather than adding on something that might be a real deterrent to people coming out in favor of the project like this. So I absolutely love all of the information that was presented tonight and a couple of days ago. I love the work of the task force and all of its 32 members. And I really appreciate all of the work that the Park District staff have done to inform. It's astounding that there's been 30 meetings plus that have been around to educate people. So the process is really something that, you know, we all need to take note that we're on the right track with this. So I'll stop my comments there and turn it over to someone else.
Can I just clarify something, Rob? I got the impression from Jim that the proposal is more likely to pass that with one that includes the turf, even though I think everybody would agree a priority is Oakland rink itself, but it sounds like you have both wider public support and it isn't just a maintenance issue, it's a growth issue too. But in terms of actual support, I thought it's more likely to pass if you have the bigger package.
I think
this is, remember our conversation about that, and it definitely is in the back of my mind too, and that's why it makes this decision a tough one. So I do appreciate the comment, Gary.
Okay. This is Jim. What I would say is what the indoor turf field enables you to do is there's a phrase that Paul uses, which is spread the love, to make more members of the community feel like they're going to benefit from something. And I think the indoor turf field really helps with that. If you don't have the indoor turf field, what this could very easily end up being is the hockey rink proposal. And we talked about the percentage of Oakland Park users in a potential electorate. If we shrunk that down, that was 19-ish%. I mean, there's no way for us to know exactly what that's going to be in an electorate, but let's use that number. If we were looking at ice rink users instead of park users, that number is going to be even lower. And so I think that's the challenge. I can't sit here and tell you that 100% it's going to be more likely to pass if you have the indoor turf field proposal, because I do think that in order to know that definitively, you have had to test that 23 million first. I mean, that's just the nature of public opinion polling, right? Is like, if that 31 million is already out there and then you ask about the 23, obviously that's going to have an impact on the 23. So I can't sit here and tell you, yes, 100% it would be easier to pass with the indoor turf field. But I think that based on the information that we have, the priority that people are placing on it, in both the mail and the phone survey, I think that it just enables you to run potentially a different type of campaign to appeal to more members of the community if that indoor turf field is included. That answer is why the old polling joke is, there's no such thing as a two-handed or as a one-handed pollster, because every pollster says, well, on the one hand this, but on the other hand that. But I do think that that including the turf field in there, it makes this a little bit different, and again, it enables you to appeal to more members of the community.
Picking out the turf field also takes out one of the largest negative, which was the tree removal. It would reduce a lot of the tree removal. So it's not just adding in, it's also taking off. It's not a simple math equation, in my opinion. And Cindy, I think Oakland tested fixing Oakland tested the highest. So anyway, go ahead.
Oh, Cindy, I was just going to say, I love, I'm a tree person too, truthfully, and I would love to know if there's some way to change the number of trees that get cut. But the indoor walking path, even though it's a fairly modest cost, was something that was very popular too. So the indoor turf has that indoor walking possibility, and that was a popular item too.
Yeah, I'm really worried about that because it's not a path. So the more we say indoor walking, the more I feel like we're setting ourselves up for a lazy river. There's no path. It's just you can walk around in that building.
I think we've called it an area in most marketing.
That to me was a little slippery. Go ahead, Matt.
So someone can certainly correct me if I'm wrong, and I'm sure will not hesitate to do so. But when we started on this project, the turf field, there's a financial gain to having the turf field there that helps the whole project work from a finance point of view. It can't not be necessarily translated to the exact cost of the referendum because it's ongoing revenue that offsets future expenses. So I understand that it could be a difficult concept, but that combined, the revenue potential from the turf field, combined with the fact that it's one of the priorities of in the polling, and with the task force saying that we think that it's important to have that in there, seems to me to sort of indicate that we should have the turf field included in a referendum if we're going to put it out for referendum.
I agree with Commissioner Coyne on he brought up the fact, he asked the question, Matt, you asked the question earlier if the people taking the poll had the pro formas basically about the revenues and the expenses, and they didn't. And I think that information will be important to share with the community during the campaign, them being educated on what Matt just said, how the turf field kind of helps pay for the rink in a way. And the other thing that was striking to me is that the turf field was also important among parents and swing voters, or not politically swing voters, but swing voters for the purposes of this referendum, that the turf field was important to have for the people who were on the bubble a bit. So, and yeah, I think we need to move forward on this because it's sad that we're even sitting here thinking about, oh my God, what happens if the mechanicals break in this ice rink? That just is a striking indication of how long this has been deferred.
Hi. So yeah, I mean, I would echo a lot of Commissioner Hulting and Commissioner Coyne's thoughts on this, and then also I had the good fortune of being able to be present both for the two previous task force meetings, and then for the one Tuesday night. And I have to say, like, those task force meetings made me more jazzed about this project than I initially would have been. And I think if a committee could continue to spread more information and more details and explain how this would benefit multiple sectors of our park using populations, I think it could be a very powerful tool. And when I think about the things that people have complained about with the park district. I mean, I definitely heard a lot of people a couple years ago complaining about how so many Park Ridge people end up over at La Verde because we didn't have a good indoor turf facility. And I remember, you know, when my own son did an indoor soccer class at the park district, it was in the main park gym, which was like, it's little, right? It's not fantastic. And the fact that this would give more indoor play space opportunities, I think is a really great thing. I mean, there could be small people, well, you know, like little kid classes there. There could be older kid classes there beyond just the sports, right? So it has potential uses year round. It's something that I think the community could really benefit from. And when I think about what I think would be best for the community, I think it is going all in, because another thing that people complain about is, you know, if we're gonna is not going all in, right? Like if we're gonna do a project, let's do it right. Let's put in things for everybody. Let's not make it just, hey, let's make the ice parents happy. Like, let's make it, all right, it's something that's good for the figure skating and ice skating and speed skating populations, but it also has things for other sports. And, you know, like maybe not an exact walking path, but an opportunity of a place where seniors would be able to walk for free. Like and, you know, an improved dog park. It's a lot of good things for a lot of different segments. And we have invested so much time, energy, and also money in terms of like resources of staff time, but also in resources thrown towards consulting firms, that at this point it's like, we got to do something. We need to move forward. It's kind of ridiculous almost. I want to see the community decide. I think it makes sense to put it in November when we have a higher percentage of the community weighing in. And I think we need to move forward. And if the community says, no, screw it, we don't want it, then okay, then we regroup. But I think we at least got to put it out there first. So those are my thoughts for what they're worth.
I agree as well. I think one of the things I liked about opening back up the task force, and thank you everyone that was on the task force, Mr. Martin, Mr. Mann, we appreciate you representing it as well. It was important to find out the feedback. Did it change in the last few years? And it seemed the momentum was going in the direction to support it on a referendum. And I really think a project of this magnitude, we just need to make sure, like Cindy said, if we don't want to have the lazy river come back in the future. If it's a walking path, let's make sure people have access to that path. And the expectation is that more users will be able to use Oakland, which I think I support it, because it appeals to not only ice skating, hockey, but soccer, football, baseball. More affiliates can use it, and I think the direction I support what the task force presented with us to, and would be supportive of moving forward with the recommendation. Thank you.
All right, I guess is it my turn to say something? This is Joan. All right, here's my take on the referendum. We are on borrowed time with our 52-year-old ice rink. It needed to be fixed yesterday, and the costs are just going to keep going up. So I think it's imperative we get on a referendum ASAP. That being said, I also don't believe a $31 billion price tag that includes the want of a turf field, not the need, but a want of the turf field is passable. I just don't think people will vote for it. We need to explain to the voters that this is an urgent need to fix up the ice rink, and building on the success of our programs of ice, figure skating and hockey and speed skating. To build a studio rink to compete with the other towns brings more skaters and in turn more revenue. I think this ice skating, that's where our focus should be. Sure, it would be nice to offer more indoor sports, but I think the district is better off focusing on the facilities and programs we have now and do it well, rather than build something new and expensive, very expensive. I fully understand the argument of waiting until November for more voters, but I don't think we should. I think we have a compelling story to tell, and if we tell it well, it could get passed. Because if we have to go back on the ballot again and again, it will only cost more, and we will get less for our money. So I am, even though the science may not, the survey may say wait till November. I don't think we should wait. I think like I said, if we can sell our story, we have it's urgent that we fix this ice rink up, and we do something to improve and enhance our programming. I think it will help. But the turf field, I was really never a fan. Sorry, and it's just a want, and I don't, and I'm a little skeptical of the survey results that people say they want it so badly. I think the people who wanted it did respond to it, but I think there's a lot of voters out there who didn't care to respond, and we don't know their feelings. So anyway, that's where I stand right now. Sorry to be a little downer, but that's how I am. That's how it is.
I disagree with all of your points, with all due respect, Commissioner Bendy. It flies in the face of all the recommendations made by a large task force of people. It flies in the face of the data we just saw from the survey that the turf is important for broadening the appeal. It flies in the face of having not just a more representative voting pool in November, but one that is more favorable to passing the referendum. And I will say that in certain demographics, parents and younger demographics, I do think they view an indoor turf field as a need because they want a place for youth to play indoor sports. So,
well, the indoor turf field is a want.
I disagree with everything you just said.
So what? Yeah, it is a want. It's not a need. And I don't think. I don't really think 31 million is going to pass. That's my fear too.
And the data just said that the two different prices don't make a difference in terms of swinging people either way. Anyway, I won't belabor it.
We can sell what we need, and I don't know if we can sell what we want. That's and I think that will be the problem going forward if you go with the turf field.
That's great, not to pile on or anything, and maybe I should shut up, but the fact is that almost everything that we do in the park district is a want, is because we don't have to have parks. We do have to have garbage service. We do have to have our streets plowed. We're providing park facilities and recreational facilities. I think they're vitally important to our community. Don't get me wrong. I think that what we do is great, but we don't need an ice arena at all. We don't need a turf field at all. We want to have it, but it's not what we want. It's the community seems to want those things. And we have developed we spent a lot of time and a lot of money trying to come up with a plan that for the use of Oakland. And I apologize, I'm just coming off of an illness and I'm kind of losing my train of thought sometimes. So, but if I just want to stress that all of this is kind of a want, and it's a matter of prioritizing what wants we want. And the task force has done an excellent job of presenting this. The consultants that we hired has done an excellent job. The park district staff has done an excellent job of giving us all the information that we need. So I would like to see us move forward. I'm sort of ambivalent on the November date. I think the November date makes more sense, like I said before. But if it's a good plan, I do agree with you, Joan, that if it's a good plan, it'll pass either way. But You know, I think that I would rather have more input from the public, which would lead me to November. So, and not with that, I'm going to get a drink of water. I'll be right back.
Well, all right, I'll say this about, you know, then let's put it on in June, see what they say. If it's like the one advisory referendum we had almost 20 years ago for a pool and things, where it got roundly defeated for about 20 million bucks or something like that. You know, then we go back and regroup in November and we cut it back and, you know, say, hey, we really need this. You know, this is what we need to fix up our ice skating. Because do you want to really be a town? You say, maybe we don't need a ice skating place. Well, do you want to be the town that tears it down and gets rid of it? I don't. That'd be terrible. So, you know, I don't want that. I don't want it to fail. And I just think let's get going on this. This should have happened maybe 3 years ago. So.
Well, I mean,
we have that option.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, we have that option in November to put it on the April ballot as well, too, Gail, don't we?
That's a year and a half away.
Thank you for the quick math. And what is the cost to put it on the ballot? Because I like just a rush to put it on a few months difference.
The cost to put it on the ballot? Matt,
I mean,
was that your question?
Yeah, whether we put it on excuse me, lost my train of thought. I defer. Sorry.
Well, I mean, I have a thought in terms of the spring versus November. Like, yes, in theory, sooner is better than later, but in terms of reaching a wider audience, just in general, it's good. But also, I think a June primary is going to be kind of weird because it's summer, because people, particularly, say, parents of school age children, a voting bloc that's already underrepresented during primaries is going to be even less there if they're off on vacation and, you know, trying to keep track of what the heck to do with their children when school's not in session. And I definitely say that as somebody who still is living with school age children. And I think having school age children, and most of my friends also are in that same boat. And the things I hear from people, like, yes, you know, as Matt said, technically nothing we do is an actual need, right? Like we're higher up on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you know, like beyond the basics. But what we do need to consider is, what does our community view as something that they need? And a lot of people in this community, particularly with school-age children, view an indoor turf field as something that would be very beneficial to our community. And I think that's really important. And I think that's something that we need to keep in mind.
Rob?
There were two things. I want to take advantage of having our research consultants available. On Tuesday's presentation with the data, I think it was mentioned that many states had actually changed the primary date with little to no effect. And I know that was a concern of all of ours, and maybe there can be a summary of that. I think I believe it was the other presenter that presented on that info. And I think the point that John was, the point John might have been alluding to is there an overarching cost of investing in a primary with the idea that, well, okay, then we're going to, if it doesn't go with the primary, then it's going to be in November, or if it's not November, it's going to be April. Are there costs inherent with that kind of a publicity campaign that we should be keeping in mind for a backup plan?
This is Jim, and to the point about primary dates changing. So yes, there are a lot of states where the date of the primary changes pretty frequently. I used Georgia's example on Tuesday, so I'll use that again today. You know, the primary in Georgia has been, depending on the year, over the last 8 years. Sometimes it's been in May, sometimes it's been in June, sometimes it's been in July. In Texas, it has bounced around from March to April pretty frequently. It may end up being in May this year. What we have seen is that you don't have the dramatic shifts in turnout that you might expect. And again, the reason for that is that the primaries, unless they're like a super competitive presidential primary, tend to be fairly low turnout. So if you are someone, but there are also elections that are very consistent in who turns out. So if you're someone who turns out to vote in primary elections, then guess what? If the primary goes from March to June, to use what's happening in Illinois, you're still going to find a way to vote. In the big X factor here that I think is important to point out is it's not like there's an election on March 6th and then there's an election on June 15th. I know those aren't the exact dates. I'm just picking a date in March and a date in June, and you've got to be there to vote on that date. I believe there's early in-person voting is going to start in Illinois in May, and vote by mail will start at around the same time. So you're going to have, even though it's going to be June, even though you're going to be getting into summer, you're going to have a month to vote. And so if you really want to vote, if you're someone who's always voted in March elections, you will, in all likelihood, still be able to vote in that June election.
Thank you.
Could you remind me for a second, though, what was the percentage of parents of school-age children who typically vote in a primary versus typically vote in a general?
It's you could have upwards of the high 40s be in a general election be parents of school-age children. In a primary electorate, you're going to be more like 35 to 40.
So there is a bump for the general.
Yes, definitely. I can pretty confidently say, and this again, I'm putting aside, considerations in terms of urgency of the project, in terms of when construction date starts. Let's put that aside. I know that's important, but that's not something that I personally can speak to. That's not my area of expertise. I don't know all the ins and outs of what's important to the district, et cetera, et cetera. What I do know and what I can confidently say is that an electorate in November 2022 is very, very likely to be what I would term a friendlier electorate than a June 22 electorate.
Okay, I'm gonna. Go ahead, Rob.
In general, I think everybody knows that we're a November election would be more favorable towards this. I can't help but think that there's quite a few people that are definitely no against this. There's definitely a constituency that aren't willing to support tax increases at this point. There, in terms of the no difference chart, the no difference chart, I think, also could be construed the other way, where whether it's 31 million or 23 million, they will vote for that. And I think one of the points that I want to ensure is that this actually passes. And I feel like we, again, go for the whole hog here with the 31 million, or we could do the thing that's going to be assured of passing by doing the 23 million, because as we see, it's no difference. People are still going to be drawn to it. People are still going to vote for it. And I could see that at some point, if everything goes really well, then we reconsider going with the additional cost of the turf field somewhere down the road, but just to ensure that we actually do what we need to do for the whole complex to ensure its viability in the future.
Yeah, just to jump on that, I'm going to backup Joan, maybe because we're in that over 55 women. I agreed with everything you said. We all have differences of opinions. I have a random list of things here. Laverde is actually much easier for me to get to than Oakland. There's a definite problem, in my opinion, a traffic problem in that corner of the world, and this is not going to make it better. One of my problems is that reading this, there was the baseball affiliate was not necessarily strong for turf. I've had people on the soccer affiliate tell me that it wasn't big enough to do anything. I'm not a fan of the turf for various reasons. So if this was 23 million without turf, I'd be 100% for it. Right now, I'm not. As far as the task force, I'm very remiss in not thanking Gary and Edward and the rest of the group. I really appreciate your work, and I appreciate you sitting through this tonight. I hope it's not too painful, but we have to have some honest conversations. So thank you. It did whittle down to 9 people. And, so we're saying we're taking the advice of those people. It's not a large cross section, and I'm not saying it's less valid, but I just want to state that, that to me, we have a lot of feelings too. So, that's one data point to me, and I'm thankful for the people who stuck through to the end. I can't believe that other people didn't. It kind of bummed me out. And then kind of the elephant in the room is the COVID costs. Our next item on the agenda, we're going to talk about, or further down the agenda, what's going on at Woodland. And I haven't heard a good discussion about why that went up $143,000. But I don't know what the future holds, and I don't know about this inflation, the COVID. We're ballparking a number, and maybe Gail, you can detail again, or whomever, how we ballparked for inflation, and if we still feel comfortable for that number, because we're promising things, and that was a good question that was thrown in there, and it's very reasonable to believe that would impact us.
I think when I referred to the task force, I referred to the sentiments that were expressed in the February and March 2020 timeframe as well. I was on the task force, and as I recall, the task force unanimously supported the configuration with the turf. So Cindy, I'm thinking about not just the 9 people who met the other night, but like the full sentiments. This one to.
Yeah, I can address first. I will just continue on that sentiment about the committee. I think it's important to point out, when Margaret and I have had several conversations with Paul and Jim about just what's going on, and just the whole process and preparing, and Margaret gets a lot of credit too, and a lot of the staff for the back of the the work, all the work that's gone in, and thank you to the board for acknowledging that. Just to be clear on the numbers on the task force, we had 33 initially that said they wanted to participate. 4 people at first were absent. That brought it to 29. So the second meeting, all 5 absent were different people than the 4 absent at the first meeting. So there were 5 people absent. This is typical. After the COVID pause, 2 are now board members. 5 decided they didn't want to continue, and then we didn't get response from 3, but 23 confirmed staying on the task force. So, there was 10 present, 2 people were absent because 1 had to leave early. 2 people were absent, said they were coming. 8 responded that they were not available to attend the meeting for various reasons, work, etc. So I think there's a lot of interest still from those that may have not been here. And Melissa pointed out a very good point, that those, the group had all agreed back at the second meeting to test this project with the community. So it's not as cut and dry as it looks, that there was and I don't want to just say just, because the 9 we had were very diverse, and
I'm just saying it's a data point. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, but I just thought I'd give some context to the committee.
Right.
And that Paul had said he does these all over the country. He said that's very typical, even in the normal circumstances when the meeting would have been a few meetings after the second one. In terms of the costs, it's a challenge, of course, everywhere because of the supply chain. I would hope, and of course I don't have a crystal ball, but November, if that was when we would, put this on the referendum, that things might try to, we'd have a better hope that settles down versus going in June, and the same with the COVID concerns. Now, who knows, right, with all the variants? But I mean, I'm not going to say that's not going to be around, but it could, you're putting more time in between these concern factors. In terms of the costs, as Terry said, yeah, you have a point, Cindy, that we're running into challenges, and the challenges at Woodland, as we'll talk about, are not just supply chain issues. They're permitting, and also an issue, with the way that the costs were put, the project was put out to bid. So we'll talk about that, and we'll give you hopefully what you will, we've come to the conclusion of why that happened. So it's not all that, but it is some. But we would, certainly hope that the bidding environment, as Terry said, the timing for bidding, that's huge with our type of projects, bidding them out at the time that schools are not bidding them out. So that would be favorable to us, most likely, if we move this to November. So Terry, I don't know if you have anything to add to the escalation of costs, and how, and it was much more than just a ballpark. These are numbers that were put together, very detailed, and given out, to the board and to the task force by square footage of the facility, and they were escalated with the current circumstances and then escalated past that to when we would go out to bid if it was going to be done in June. So.
Yeah, that's the point that I would have made, Gail, is just to say that we did work with White, who is our architect engineering firm, to update those numbers for, for the current market. And so, they, just like Gail said, they don't have a crystal ball, but they're in the industry, they're the experts, and this is what they're seeing based on other projects and what those square footage numbers are going to look like from their estimation. So.
I guess the last point I wanted to make is this data does not indicate it's a slam dunk. The soft positives were discussed a lot the other night. If a group comes out and says, we're killing trees, all right, and that's not impossible that was going to happen, then you have organized opposition. So I guess you're saying, we're trusting we're going to have a strong committee to get this to pass. But if we wait till November and we don't pass, I just can't even, I just feel like we're living on borrowed time. And if I wouldn't vote for something in the voting booth, I don't know how I can vote for it as a board member. So that's what I'm struggling with.
Well, that's why we have 7 board members, and it's a majority of the board members that will make this decision. We're not asking for the decision tonight. As a matter of fact, it would have to be on the agenda to, vote on this, because it is such a big project that we would have to have a formal vote. So yes. I will take the direction of if we want to bring it back for a vote at the next meeting, so we can give clear direction and either continue on this path or change course. I think the sooner we can do that, the better for everybody, as stated by many board members. And, I just my couple closing thoughts on the topic for now is that it's not whether, to me, it's going to pass or not. I think we owe it to the community to test what they're telling us in terms of facilities that they want, right? And so they're going to let us know and we're going to know. We're going to know the people that don't want it, and the ones that do. But we are being told by the data and by a task force and by several other surveys and at the meetings about the need for these types of facilities that we're talking about. So that's all I'll say for now.
Final thoughts, anyone? Matt, John?
Would it be possible to get the data again on the revenue that it would generate with the turf versus without the turf? Because I think that's important to see as well.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
I'll just say thank you all for all you're doing. And personally, I'll be supportive of whatever you end up deciding. Seriously.
Thank you, Gary.
Thank you, Gary.
Okay.
Thank you, Gary.
Right.
When does the decision
Thanks,
have
Ed.
to be made for when? Yeah, thank you, Ed and Gary. When does this decision have to be made for a June referendum and a November referendum? What months are those? And
Thanks, Joan. Since we have called down to Cook County election, and they have told us a tentative, estimate date, but because this June election is so new, they don't have that date out yet, but they said tentatively April, I think about April 11th, but that's not it set in stone. For the June election, you would have to, have a decision. And then typically in the fall, for the November election, it's August. And I don't have the exact date, but it's usually about the first or, mid-second week of August. We can get you the exact date for that one, but that's around the estimate.
okay, so let me ask you this: whatever we decide, April or August, to make the final decision, how far in advance do you really want to start a committee and all that? Would you really want to have something in by February or by, June, going back,
Yeah, going backwards on the timeline, I think they, what Paul has suggested is a 2 to 3 month, and basically a 2-month intensity of the committee beforehand.
Sure.
And then, but before that happens, the staff has to pull together all the factual information. So I would say 3 months minimum would be what
before
we would
the vote, before the voting, or before the
before the voting
date you have to, before the voting. Okay, fine. Okay.
That's minimum.
Sorry, are you thinking about before the actual election day or before the opening of early voting? Because isn't there going to be like an extra long?
That's a good point. Yeah. So that's a very good point. Thank you. It'd be before May. I think they said early voting. Jim, are you still on with us? Hanging in there?
Yes.
Okay. It's for the June. I think Paul said about 2 months is early voting, like May. It's a real long time, right? For the estimated. Do you know that or not?
I'm pretty sure it would be like 5 weeks.
Okay.
It's a long time.
Yeah. So we would need to back it up from, 3 months minimum from that. So I just think, the board, you have all the data you need. And if you don't, I don't know what more we would get you, but we're certainly willing to, get you anything you need. And that's what we'd love to hear from you. And I would love it if we could just, move forward in it, either way.
Either way,
So,
meaning picking either April or June or November. Is that what you're saying, Gail?
Either way, any way which you want to move forward on this Oakland property, on the master plan.
Okay.
Yes, the whole thing. January's fine. The next meeting's fine, whatever the board decides. I would like to do it probably no later, it would be helpful, no later than to January.
Then the what?
End of January would be my wish. Yeah.
Okay.
But if you want to do it sooner, we're all for that as well. But
okay. Well, I think we had some good discussions, and if people want to have one-on-one discussions, I think that's allowed, and kick some tires. And if you come up with more questions, Gail can send out the answers to all of us. And if people have feedback on when they want to discuss this again, if you have strong ideas about that, let me know. So you know, if you know you won't be at the next meeting or whatever. So
Cindy, I thank you. I had one more thing. I apologize, but we do have scheduled for Jim and Paul Hanley, our consultants, to be on one more meeting at next month's meeting. I guess I'm just looking for a consensus. Do we think we need them? Would we like them? Do you think you might have extra questions for them to show up virtually?
do you mean the next meeting or the next month's meeting?
Next at the December meeting.
Okay.
The next meeting, yeah. So do you want to do kind of a consensus by the board? Do we want them to come back? Do we have more questions? Do we think?
Does anybody want to raise their hand if they think they need more data from the consultants? Yes, anybody? I think we've got a ton of data.
Okay, and I'm sure we can call them and email them with any questions. So, okay, thank you.
Right.
Yeah,
definitely. That means they did a great job.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jim.
Okay.
Of course, thank you all. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. All right.
Cindy, you're muted.
I was just gonna say I can't hear her.
Sorry. Okay, take it away, John.
I'm sorry. As far as finance goes, I turn it over to Superintendent DeAngelis.
Thank you, Treasurer Tunnell. The next agenda item is discussion and direction on the 2022 proposed budget. So I have prepared the budget and appropriation ordinance in tentative form. It is prepared with the same numbers that were in the proposed budget. And what we have on the agenda is to discuss whether or not the board wants to direct any changes related to expenses or revenues. The first item is expenses and adjustments to date or new items. And I would point out that I did not make any adjustments to the proposed budget as it relates to expenses. So I don't know if there were any items that the board wanted to put forth that we didn't consider in the proposed budget. Now would be when we'd want to hear about that so we could amend that budget appropriation ordinance.
Can I just ask expenses? Is this where we go over some of the questions that we received answers to in the email?
Sure. I guess if it was, I mean, however you want to do it would be fine. I tried to split it up into expenses and revenues. So we would be talking about the information related to fees after we finished our expense discussion, but we can do it however you'd like.
Oh, I don't remember any expenses that were questioned.
I would agree, but I want to make sure that the board has the opportunity to, raise any questions or thoughts on that. So I did break down the expenses. As I said, we didn't make any changes. The second item was the employee compensation, because that is such a big component of the expenses of the district. We wanted to make sure that we heard that the board is comfortable with the compensation recommendations in the budget. The other thing that we were looking for would be consensus from the board because of the timing and how we implement increases based on merit. When we do the merit reviews for full-time employees, because the number is not so voluminous, we're able to provide retro pay. So we can, have that implemented once the budget is approved after the public hearing. But for the part-time employees, we're already in process of the merit reviews, and in order to get those increases to employees as of January 1st, we are looking for your consensus that you're comfortable with the recommendation in the budget and that we can move forward with that implementation once you've approved the budget and appropriation ordinance in tentative form, expecting that there wouldn't be any changes when it's approved in January, so that then part-time employees could get their merit increases effective as soon as January 1st. So does anyone have any questions on that or thoughts?
Diane DeGangi is also on, if there's any questions about the salary schedule and the proposal that was in the budget. So we're just looking for, if there's any opposition or any suggestions on that portion of the budget. All right.
Okay. So we will move forward with implementing those part-time salary increases so that they are effective January 1. And then the capital projects, we had a long presentation on the many needs, and I don't think there was a lot of discussion, so this would be the opportunity for any feedback on that. Okay, looks like we're ready to spend the money. Now let's talk about revenues. So we did have some discussion on fees, particularly related to pools. As I think about it, I think some of the other discussion was related to the fitness center, childcare, which would, I guess, fall under expenses. But in any event, we provided a lot of data on the, thanks to April and her team for all of the data that we were able to get together, kind of back up for the rationale for the fees. So I hope everyone had a chance to take a look at that.
I'll break the silence, of course. I just did have one question, April, and I should have asked it before now. I got through that memo like right before the meeting. On the child care, I'm confident that we don't have to decide that now. But the loss, was that based on the new model of child care, which was like a punch system?
I believe so. It was the same as what we had budgeted previously.
Okay, because we changed it in the middle of the year last year, or last time we had it.
Right, and it was based on the same hours too. And as we discussed last time, we're definitely having a challenge with staffing at the moment. Right. So once we have more participation, more interest, we plan on following up with a survey, and we're open to bringing it back when there's a need, for sure.
Yeah, that's not my question. I just wondered if it was the first model or the second model that we based our losses on.
I believe, I would have to double check, but I believe it was the second model.
Okay, and I just hope that we can bring this up for discussion again next year if and when things change in the labor market and in the COVID world.
Oh, sure, definitely. And
I'm totally comfortable with that. I just remember that the punch card was much more lucrative for us. And I hope that's the model we looked at when we looked at viability.
Well, and we looked at both models when we were, trying to review whether or not we should put it in the budget, and even the participation then, while the participation was increased, it wasn't a significant financial impact either. So,
Okay, that's good to know.
I appreciate the information on the pool pass increases over the years. It did jump out to me that the only previous time when we had raised the passes by 6 to 7.5% was in 2014 after the renovated Centennial opened, and all the other increases were 3% or less. I'm still not wild about such a big jump all in one year. I understand logically. Gail and I had an exchange about it that was helpful. I understand logically the reason for it. You got to pay the staff more, and it's a lot of work to maintain a pool. I just, it can't be 6% every year. I do know people are like, oh, these passes go up every year. I do have heard that from people before, prior to becoming a commissioner. I'm not wild about it, but I can live with it this year. I just don't want it to be 6% every year. I don't think that's sustainable and will keep the pool passes. I think it's just too big of a jump each year. So
I want to point out also.
Good answer is we didn't do it last year. So
I know, I understand. I just want to say that, I can live with it, but it can't be 6 every year. I got you, Cindy. I hear you on that.
Yeah, looking back over the history of it was really helpful, April. So thanks for putting that together. And I think we just have to cross our fingers and hope that things return back to normal. This is a blip that, unfortunately, I don't think that we have much alternative to avoid.
and I also appreciated the history, but yeah, I maintain my objection to a 6% jump. And I don't think the fact that we didn't raise it during a terrible COVID year means we get a cookie and get to raise it 6% this year. So that's my thought on it, especially because, I think when we look at the families who have multiple children, which is a lot of the families that have children in Park Ridge, it just bothers me to see this level of an increase in terms of a resource that is partially taxpayer funded. And when we were talking about losses and things like that, I don't feel like doing that to families is proper. And so, as I said, I maintain my objection to a 6% increase.
Matt's got his hand up.
I do. Yeah, I just a couple of things, and this sort of encompasses all of the items that Sandra just went over. Basically, I want to thank the entire staff of the Park District, Gail, and your team, and want to pay particular attention to Superintendent Armour's diligent work on trying to set these fees. We can agree or disagree on whether that it's too much or too little, but I think that she did a lot of research on what the market would bear for some of these, especially for the pool fees. And I think that it was a lot of work, and I appreciate the idea that this budget came about with a high degree of concern about the taxpayers' money and not trying to take, it was not a blank, you didn't look at this as a blank check that you could just make a wish list and everything was going to happen. And the increase in the budget for the different things are I think very reasonable. That said, I would say that I think we could have done this without having to have a tax levy increase, and we could have figured out different ways to restructure debt or do other things to get to the same or similar budget. But I do think that the budget itself is sound and is not too overreaching. And again, I just want to compliment everybody on their hard work and trying to come up with a budget that works. Thank you.
Appreciate that.
If I could comment really quick, thank you, Commissioner Coyne. And it's, you know, the information we sent you with the aquatics, I can't take the credit for that. It's the aquatics team that did that. We do have manager Ethan Williams on the line here. Just he wanted to be present in case there was any questions, but it is very impressive when you look at, you know, what we sent you as that follow-up. They had all the information, you know, and they have this information for every area in the district. So, you know, we do take it very seriously when we look at each area and try and do what's best for the district, and managing that with, you know, as was already mentioned, we don't know about inflation. So that's, you know, we don't know what's going to happen. We do know what's going to happen with minimum wage. And that's one of the biggest challenges that we face for sure at the moment when trying to set our fees. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Ethan, as well. I apologize for the oversight.
Still working.
Yes, always.
You were just being thanked, Ethan.
Sorry, we were closing up. There was something that kind of broke at the fitness center. So,
oh, don't even start. Don't start.
Sorry, Terry, we'll put in a facility dude for it later.
Don't tell the board.
I don't think it's anything bad. I think it's something that
just say thank you. Just say thank you.
Yeah, thank you. It's
okay.
Yeah,
very good.
I echo real sentiment. It was a lot of work, but it's what everything. It's how everybody makes the decision. So, thanks.
I think the point is that this district is run with data, and it's very good data, and we appreciate that. Gail and April and Ethan and everyone else who contributes to that. Terry, we appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, just one final comment. I agree as well. Thank you to everyone. It's disappointing in the challenges that we've had through COVID. It is sad to see that we do have to go to the taxpayers and ask for some more money. That's hard for me to support. But with all due respect to the work that went into this project, I still will vote yes for the budget. But I just feel for the families. On one side, having a park to go to is a free amenity. Paying to take a program in the park, we have to make a choice whether we're going to pay for that or not. And I think you guys did a great job trying to be delicate with not increasing too much or cutting back too little. But I think a lot of work went into this, and I appreciate that. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sandra, I missed your name. I didn't see your picture there before. Of course, you're the queen of data.
That's okay. Did anyone else want to have any comments before Commissioner Tunnell calls the question for adoption of the ordinance in tentative form? Okay, I will turn it back over to Treasurer Tunnell.
Thank you very much. I move to adopt in tentative form ordinance number 21-6 the combined annual budget and appropriation ordinance of the Park Ridge Park District and the Board of Park Commissioners of the Park Ridge Park District, Cook County, Illinois, for the fiscal year beginning January 1, 2022 and ending December 31, 2022. May I have a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion? May we please have a roll call vote?
Commissioner Bendy,
Yes.
Commissioner Bowe,
Yes.
Commissioner Coyne,
Aye.
Commissioner Halting,
Yes.
Commissioner Leduc,
Yes.
Commissioner Tunnell,
Yes.
Commissioner Grau.
Yes.
Thank you very much, board.
That concludes our 3-week discussion on the 3 or 4 weeks. So thank you for your due diligence to everyone, and congratulations to the new board members for that fun, extravagant 3 weeks that we had together. So I have the pleasure of moving on and passing the baton to Commissioner Halting.
Thank you. And I remember listening to the budget discussions last year and coming out of them and thinking that was actually really interesting to hear about. So I knew I was dorky enough to become a Park District Park Board member because I enjoyed the budget discussion.
Excellent.
I remember shaking my head and coming out of my room being like, it's actually really interesting. It's all over for me. Anyway, buildings and grounds, Terry. So, you know, Cindy in passing earlier talked about how she was interested in a little more context on the increases, the permitting related increases at Woodland Park. And I gotta say, I would also be interested in a bit more context about what happened there. I know there was the MWRD delay, but I too feel like I need a little bit more background.
Sure, and I think just as a point of order, I believe we need a motion first before we.
Oh yeah, sorry. I always want to talk about it first because that feels logical, but I can't be logical. So I will go ahead with the motion. In relation to the Woodland Park Site Improvements Project, I move to accept the facts set forth in the staff memorandum and approve change order number 1 to the contract with Team Ryle Incorporated, increasing the contract sum in the amount of $135,697.69. Can I have a second, please?
Second.
Now we can have the discussion. I keep on making that mistake. I apologize.
That's okay. So as you mentioned on page 12 of the board packet, there is a memo that was provided for this project. We did have a large change order, I believe you were made aware of previously, that was submitted to us. It was about $160,000. We have been diligently working with our team, the contractor, the architect and engineers and staff on this project, just to look at the different parts and pieces of this to see what expenses should be incurred here. So there's really 2 driving forces here with this, and a lot of it stems from permitting delays. And so we did have permitting delays at MWRD, and so a portion of this, which you'll see reflected in our subsequent change order with Smith Group, is related to permit delays specifically. When I say permitting delay expenses, we had delays that caused a cardinal change in the agreement, caused such a time delay that it was something that when the additional expenses came for labor and materials due to that delay, that was something that we couldn't just look at the agreement and say, no, sorry, that's part of the agreement, that's your bad, your loss. We had to, kind of take care of those because of the delay, the length of time, being that it was a cardinal change. So that accounts for a good chunk of it. But the larger portion is from permitting changes. And the delay in permitting was because when this was designed and planned, and some of it, just because of the timing, was overlooked, This was designed and planned to an ordinance, the water management ordinance, Bulletin 70, which doesn't mean a whole lot to you, but they're on Bulletin 75 now, which is only one more down. They go in 5s. But essentially, they designed the rain garden portions of this project to the old standards. And so the new standards have larger rainwater volume calculation requirements. So that's the majority of the expense. Now, had this been designed initially to that permit, to the correct permitting, we would have incurred that expense, and that would have been part of the bid numbers that came in. So that portion of the project is still in the hands of the Park Ridge Park District, and we have to do that. And so we do feel very confident, though, that in these changes, we are looking at unit prices and things, and the unit prices that we're being charged for these changes are very much in line. In fact, in several situations, our architect feels that they're kind of a little bit below what they would have expected. So it's not, we do not feel like we're getting, dragged over the coals on this one. And I think, ultimately, in pointing this out, and it's kind of a little bit more for the discussion on the next one, the architect engineering firm on this, through discussions, really did step up and take ownership of their error, and that'll be reflected as the number you'll see on the next change order. So we certainly do appreciate their partnership on this, and that they were willing to step up and do what was right and acknowledge their error and the financial impact that it could have had on the Park District. So, this project is still ongoing. There are still, various different things that are going to be coming up as we move forward. I have in here that we anticipate a future credit change order of about $13,000 for some changes that we're making in the rain garden, and that we're planning on using biosolids for the planting bed of the rain garden seed mix instead of using the compost that was spec'd. So we'll be getting free material versus material we would have had to pay for. So, we're constantly doing things like that. And, within the last, actually really just this morning, we've identified that, well, there's a little bit of a shortage in gravel in another area. So that's about another $8,000 add or so that we're going to have to look at. So this is an evolving process and project that, we'll continue to be working on and do what's in the best interest of the Park District.
Thank you, Terry. I appreciate the refresher / background. Do people have questions for Terry? Cindy, I thought I saw a.
Well, I was ready to be Matt because I thought Matt wasn't going to be here tonight, and I stood up for you on the last project that went over budget. And is this what percentage increase is this of the project? 100, like 10% or no?
Yeah, it's about 10%. I have not done the math on it, but it is about 10%. Yeah.
It's shocking. When did the standards change for the water retention?
So the standards changed in May of 2020. They were adopted, and then we submitted for permit earlier this year in April, I believe it was, of 2021. And so what we did identify and Smith Group owned was that in that error that probably caused the lengthy delays in permitting, because they had to go back and forth with, revisions and changes. There were some delays with MWRD. I'm not saying that there weren't, because there was. I mean, legitimate delays there, but them having designed it to the wrong standard. Just another bit of refresher, just for everyone's background. And it's hard sometimes, even until you look over the time frame, to remember all this. But this project started a long time ago, and then was, we were awarded the grant, and we got to a point where we had to receive another letter, like from the administrators from IDNR, to say, you may move forward with this project. And we were in limbo for months and months and months and months and months during COVID, waiting for that. And so the whole project was put on the shelf during COVID while no work was being processed through IDNR. And so, during that time, and then it got picked up, is part of the reason that was overlooked and they missed it, because it was during that time frame that it was, the adoption had changed. They had gotten the project to 95% drawings completed. We put the thing on the shelf, and then a new ordinance came out, and then it got back brought off the shelf. Now, it's still their responsibility to be up on those things and take it, which is why they're taking responsibility. But this was not your typical project where you start it and continue working all the way through it. There's been a long time and a lot of delay and price escalations and stuff.
I understand that, but the permits were given. So after the permits were given, the permits were given this summer, right?
Yeah, but so the permits, when we applied for the permit, the design that they turned in to get the permit was designed improperly. So they
But we were given a permit. So how do you find out it's designed improperly if we were given a permit?
Oh, like why are we finding out now?
Yes.
So the change orders were starting to be discussed amongst the project team a couple of months ago. And by the time it got to my desk and I started to look over it and I had questions about the delay portion of this, I said, well, what's with the delay? We don't pay for delays. Here's our agreement. Here's what the contract says. We don't pay for these sort of things. And so as we started to peel back the onion and look a little bit, I said, well, what caused all these delays? And then I said, well, wait a minute. Why were there such changes in the stormwater volume detention? And I saw that there was a comment in one of the MWD review notes that I don't always read all of those. Those are designed directed towards them to make updates for their designs. I noted that they had designed it to the wrong bulletin. It said, please update the bulletin 75. And so I said, well, what does that mean? So I started to dig in and figure out that. And once I identified that, I had further discussions with Smith Group about how that came to be and what was the cause there.
So it was permitted conditionally?
No, it was permitted. They designed the project. It wasn't designed to the current standards. The permits got turned in. During the process, they said, you've got to make all these revisions. All those revisions got them to the current standards. They said, here's your permit. And then once that happens, then the contractor says, all right, what all do I have to change? What do I need to do differently that wasn't in the drawings originally? What's the difference going to be? And so they started pulling together all those costs, and they showed up with, well, we need another $160,000. And I said, whoa, wait a minute. We need to look a little further into. You just need $160,000. And so as we were pulling that apart, that's what came up.
It's shocking. So what about our drawings for Oakland? What were they designed for?
Designs for Oakland right now are conceptual drawings. They're not to any sort of standard. I mean, they're based around the current standards for building, different architecture firm, different engineering firm, but we're not at the point where they're drawing those things for permit applications yet. It just doesn't happen at this stage of the process.
What's the past history with this vendor?
We've had very successful projects. We did the Hinckley Park tennis courts with them. We did the Northeast Playground with them. We've had successful projects that were completed on time and under budget. So I have to say, one of the things that stuck out for both myself and project manager Meunier is that they're experiencing the same thing that everybody else is, and they've had a pretty heavy turnover in the staff that's working on this project. And so I'm not excusing them and saying that makes it okay, but that certainly brings itself challenges. When you're in the process of designing and permitting a project and the person that's responsible for making sure every little detail over the course of 100 and something pages of drawings is different from the person that started it, it's easy to see how a few things could get overlooked. So we pay them for, so that's why we're having the conversation that we did with them, but
I see how it happened, Terry, but we also didn't have any we usually have padding that covers most of that, and it looks like we're taking $150,000 from next year's budget to cover part of this. Is that true? Is that what I'm reading?
It won't be that much.
Yeah, I don't anticipate it being that much, but what had happened was we were, just as we were finalizing some of these budget numbers, this had come to my attention that we were going to be dealing with a large change order. And so not knowing exactly what it would be, but knowing that we wanted to make some account for this, in next year's budget or for this, in the capital project for this. We had a discussion and this dollar amount was put into the budget to help with this, so.
Well, it's just disconcerting to have this large of a project with a 10% change order that we did not have room, because you always have room in your allowances, and then to look at a $31 million project, it's very bad timing.
Well, and I agree, and I do generally have money available in these, but as it turned out for this one, it just didn't work out that way, and I'm not happy about it either. But these projects are a little bit different, obviously, and we're talking about a $31 million project that's still a ways off, and we have time and opportunities to build in contingencies into that, or different options of construction methods too. So.
Well, there are contingencies in that right now. I mean, in those numbers, there's contingencies.
Yeah, there absolutely is.
And I think the track record on the large projects has been very successful. The pool, the Prospect Park, Main Park, those all came within budget. So yes, this is a hiccup and we're not happy about it. And I've actually talked to the president of the company and he was concerned to call me about it. And so I was very involved with this as well. And Terry gave you a good explanation, and it's unfortunate, but with construction, sometimes these things happen. I mean, it's not just construction, but there's a lot of factors that go into these things. But we hear you, and we are just as concerned.
I have I guess a couple questions. One is, what if, I guess as a practical matter, there's nothing else we can do to mitigate that cost, correct?
I've been working on mitigating this cost for a long time already, and I've mitigated it by $30-something thousand, and then some, actually, because in the beginning of this, I thought we were going to be responsible for the whole 160, which is not the case. So.
Okay, and any kind of further, and the project, it has to be done, right? We're already committed to it, and we've dug up half of the park. So, while I'm not really at all pleased about the circumstances, it doesn't sound like it's anything. And I like you, Terry, but I would give you a lot of grief if I thought that it was due to some negligence on your part that this came to be. But I think that we should probably just, I feel like we're just going to have to hold our nose and vote for this, because I don't see what the other choice is.
And like we said, the majority of the cost we would be incurring anyway, right? We would have had, so it's not like we're paying. The majority of this cost is, money that we would have had to have that for that permit change. So, and just as another note is that our attorney Price was involved in these conversations and has reviewed our approach and what we're doing. And Dirk can speak for himself, but this is the route that we need to go as a district in terms of the contract language as well.
Right. Terry did a phenomenal job here to stay on the architect and get them to come along and partner without a lot of involvement from legal. It's as soon as there was a problem, it's a math problem for the district. There's going to be a cost increase. It's like if they forgot to put, we were adding lavatories and they forgot to put the fixtures in. You are always going to have to pay for the fixtures. The question becomes, how sharp would the pencil have been if they were properly included at the beginning when they were bid on? Well, here that was the problem. They didn't include everything that was supposed to be included, but you were going to have to pay for these other things anyway, no matter what. The question then becomes, how much more or how much less would we have paid? Well, the delay damages we wouldn't have ever had to have paid if we had done it correctly, if they had done it correctly, and Terry got every one of those dollars back. And as for the other ones, might the pencils have been sharper? Might it have been a different labor rate? maybe, but the cost of finding that out and proving it is far and exceed of what you'd get. So this is an awesome solution that Terry's negotiated, and you know, not great for my business model, but he's kept me on the sideline because he hasn't needed it, and this is as good a solution as I could drive. So between the contract documents and Terry's work, you know, this is what you have to pay to have this park improved.
Yeah, I'm not questioning what we have to pay. That is not my question at all. I did have one other thought, and I think I know the answer. We've accepted bids on all the alternates, so we're held to those alternates.
Yeah, those alternates are baked into the contract and the agreement already, yes. And they've got subs, and theoretically they've already they may have already done things to get those like to purchase the materials and things like that for that. So
right, and if the idea is that you're gonna cut that scope out, well, it's kind of like the best analogy I have is it's like saying you bought a new car, you drove it off the lot, you drove it for a week, and now you want to sell it. You're not going to get all your money back. Baked into the bidding on those alternates is the mobilization and all the rest, and the value of to try and cut one of them out. They're going to say no, there was work done in the preliminary stages, and so the additional cost of it is not just what was in the bid document. That's how. So you're not going to get it's not going to be dollar for dollar there anyway.
So it just as another, you know, again, we don't like this at all. We, as Gail mentioned, we've been successful on our larger projects by and large. We went through a process, for the benefit of the board for history, we went through a process of a lot of cutting with Prospect Park because we had some large change orders that showed up that were of concern to us. And so we went through and did a lot of cutting just to make sure that we were going to, you know, be on budget. Well, we got to the point where we ended up doing so good on cutting that we ended up having projects that we needed to come back in later and do with the money that we saved the first time around because we got so concerned. So I'm not suggesting we're going to get all this money back, but we ended up going through that process, you know, kind of almost overdoing it. And in hindsight may not have been needed. And at you know, Centennial, we had a huge change order of $100-something thousand for the parking lot that again wasn't anticipated. But at the end of the project, when we look back at all the numbers, we were within $10 of budget overall, under budget. But you know, like there's these things that they kind of ebb and flow. I don't anticipate that we're going to find ourselves under budget in this project, but there are occasions on these larger projects where there's going to be things that happen. So.
Okay, I'm done playing bad cop. I just think that when we go 10% over on a budget this size, it deserves some kicking of the tires. So
for sure, I would expect
Matt's Christmas tree went out, so I have a feeling we're on limited time here.
That's exactly what I was going to say. That's the thing right there.
Bedtime for Matt. Terry, I know you said we didn't need to worry about Bulletin 75, but I did want to look at Bulletin 75, and the reason why the costs are increased is because the 24-hour 100-year rainstorm amount increased by an inch, which is significant. So these costs are going to be incurred across the world as people cope with the impact of climate change. And I know but I mean, this is the reason we have to pay more, because we have more water to absorb, and a 1-inch increase is significant.
Yeah, and some of those changes are going to have impacts, to your point, on other projects as well as we go forward.
Yeah.
Too, stormwater detention calculations. So.
Yeah. Better in the parks than in people's basements.
Always.
Having had water in my basement once. Okay, I'm going to wake my iPad up. Any other questions for Terry? Thank you for your work on this, Terry.
Sure.
All right, so I had already read a motion, so can we have a roll call for a vote, please?
Commissioner Bowe?
Yes.
Commissioner Coyne?
Aye.
Commissioner Hulting,
Yes.
Commissioner Leduc,
Yes.
Commissioner Tunnell,
Yes.
Commissioner Bendy,
Yes.
Commissioner Grau.
Yes. All right. And then we have the approval of change order 2. The motion, I will go ahead and read the motion. In relation to the Woodland Park Site Improvements Project, I move to accept the facts set forth in the staff memorandum and approve change order number 2 to the contract with Smith Group, decreasing the contract sum in the amount of $36,056.98, a credit to the Park District. Can I have a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion? All right. Can we have a roll call vote then?
Commissioner Coyne,
Aye.
Commissioner Hulting,
Yes.
Commissioner Leduc,
Yes.
Commissioner Tunnell,
Yes.
Commissioner Bendy,
Yes.
Commissioner Bowe,
Yes.
Commissioner Grau.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Terry. And I will turn it over to Commissioner Leduc.
And I have nothing for policy this meeting.
I think that's not true.
Oh, no. Oh,
We have
shoot.
a schedule for the meetings.
Oh, my God. Yeah, sorry. I've
Seems
blanked on the
important.
back of the- Never mind. All right. So oh, shoot.
There's
Sorry,
work you didn't have to do, John, but it's still yours. Take credit.
Yes. All right. I move to approve the 2022 calendar schedule of regular board meetings as presented. May I have a second?
Second.
All right. Any discussion? All right. Commissioner Tunnell.
Yeah, I just have a small request, and I'm at the mercy of the board, but I have a conflict on the 17th, and I think there might be a few people in the community that might have conflicts on the 17th of March. But if at all possible, if we can move that meeting to Wednesday, March 16th as a one-time option. If not, that's no problem. I would just ask that whoever could help fill in for the finance part at the meeting on that date.
Are you Irish?
I will be traveling in full disclosure, but as several of my relatives will be doing other things besides traveling.
All right. Any discussion?
I'm okay with changing the date for whatever it's worth, but I don't know what the rules are in terms of how the meetings are scheduled.
It's fine. Yeah, I mean, if the board is fine with that date, we can change it. It's not a problem.
So would I just read the motion again and
As
say-
amended, if you would like to amend it, you would as amended for the Wednesday, March 16th.
Any other further discussion?
I just want to say I'm impressed that John looked at all the dates.
I did
There's
too.
no
I
conflict.
actually,
Yeah.
I
There's
actually
no
sold
conflict with the
for a concert
Well-
that I bought back
Is
in
there any-
2020 and then got like moved and then moved again. And I was like, oh man.
In fairness, he only had to look at like the first 6 meetings of the year before he got to March 17th. So we don't want to give him credit for reading the whole thing.
But it is
there
kind
any
of funny
conflict
that
with, is there any conflict with the spring break? Because I know once there was many years ago. Any conflict with that? That's
The
the only thing I
local
would
schools will
highlight.
start that spring break the following week. That's why I didn't propose it for the following week. I know my daughter attends Roosevelt, my son's at Lincoln, and they start The 18th they're in 17th, 18th they're in school, and then the following week they're out. So.
Okay, good. Good. I'm fine. Yeah, I have no problem changing it to Wednesday.
I do think it is kind of funny that our meetings hit both St. Patrick's Day and Cinco de Mayo.
It's torturing you.
All right. Oh, Commissioner Halting, do you have a comment? Oh, sorry. I saw you raise your hand. Just a gesture. Okay.
I'm just moving my hands.
All right. So I will. Sorry, I gotta scroll back up now. Reread the motion as amended. All right, so I move to approve the 2022 calendar schedule of regular board meetings as amended to move the meeting from March 17th, 2022 to Wednesday, March 16th, 2022. Do I have a second?
Second.
All right, let's call the vote.
Commissioner Halting,
Yes.
Commissioner Leduc,
Yes.
Commissioner Tunnel,
Yes.
Commissioner Bendy,
Yes.
Commissioner Bowe,
Yes.
Commissioner Coyne,
Aye.
Commissioner Grau.
Yes. Okay, we move on to new business, and I do want to bring up one thing. There is a raffle for the Uptown lamps, and is it next Monday? Is it only for one more week, Margaret?
Yes, we pull the winner on December 13th.
December 13th. So you got a few days if you want to enter that raffle, and that's probably the last opportunity we'll have. Most of those lamps were not in good shape. So go on the Friends of the Park website and get yourself a ticket if you're interested. Any other new business? Thank you all for your hard work. This was a long meeting, but I think we had good, respectful discussion. And if anybody just wants to get back to me on when we want to discuss that thing next, let me know. If you have strong feelings. Yeah, otherwise Gail and I'll decide. All right, I move to adjourn the meeting of the Board of Park Commissioners. Can I have a second?
Second.
All right, all in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed?
Nay.
Good night, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you very much, board. Thank you, staff.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.